brightness of Paris seems somehow sadly gay. The glory that was Rome was of another day. I've been terribly alone and forgotten in old Beijing. I'm going home to my city by the bay. I left my home in San Francisco. High on a hill, it calls to me to be where little cable car climb halfway to the stars. A morning fall may chill the air. I don't care, my love waits there. In San Francisco, above the blue, and when D.C. when I come home to you, San Francisco, your golden sun will shine for me.
See it, hear it today. If you can, then it doesn't matter anyway. You will never understand it cause it happens too fast. And it feels so good, it's like walking the glass. It's so cool, it's so hip, it's alright. It's so groovy, it's out of sight. You can touch it, smell it, taste it so sweet. But it makes no difference cause it knocks you off your feet. Say you want it all. lying on the floor. So you lay down on it, then you do it some more. You got to share it, so you tear it, and you bear it, and you tear it. You want it all, but you can't have it. It's in your face, but you can't grab it. It's a lie, afraid, a lie, a sin. It's a magic, it's tragic, it's a loss, it's a win. It's dark, it's moist, it's a bitter pain. It's sad it happened and it's a shame. You want it all, but you can't have it. It's in your face, but you can't grab it. What is it? What is it? Is it? What is it? Is it? What is it? What is it? What is it? Is it? What is it? Is it? What is it? You want it all, but you can't have it. It's in your face, but you can't grab it. Is it? What is it? Is it? What is it? Is it? What is it? Is it? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Is it? What is it? Is it? What is it? Is it? What is it? Is it? Yeah, yeah, yes.
All right, and I'm happy to say that we are just about complete with this book. The book is just about done. The Gray Stage, written by Greg Fernandez Jr. This is all about the David Crowley case. I hope that this book will help many researchers, past, present, and future, with their search for the truth here. So as we take a little journey down my search for the truth, it has not changed, has not wavered. It's always been the exact same thing. What proves David Crowley guilty? So we're going to go ahead and read from the final chapter of my book here. Usually you would put something like this at the very start of the book, but I felt the book really needed to begin with the documents, with all of the facts that we know, all of the claims, what the DNA test showed. It had to start with all of that. So I saved my own views, my own thing for the very end. So this is just my view on this whole case here. The Gray Stage exists solely because of the official conclusion, as stated on page 92 of the Apple Valley Police Reports PDF. With the conclusion of the review of digital devices, Detective Brian Bone reported on October 7, 2015, there is no other information available for further investigation. Throughout this investigation, the AVPD has not discovered any information or evidence that shows anybody but David is the perpetrator of these crimes, including the killing of his wife, child, and himself. This book, The Gray Stage, is a direct response to the allegations against David Crowley. Due to the lack of evidence against David, I felt it necessary to write this book. One of the reasons I decided to write The Gray Stage was to help convince the Apple Valley Police Department to reopen case number 1500303. Either the Apple Valley Police Department should be forced to prove David Crowley guilty, or they should admit the case is unsolved. Because the official investigation failed to prove David Crowley guilty, I can only assume he is not. What other conclusion could I possibly reach under the current circumstances? Time and time again, we are asked to believe David is guilty simply because the official narrative declares it so. We wait and wait and wait for evidence of David's guilt, evidence that is never produced. Delay after delay after delay did not deter my efforts or many other people's efforts to find evidence of the allegations against David. During the official investigation, I waited patiently for a conclusion based on facts. I researched as much as I could, documenting comments and actions of those involved in this case. What I soon realized was what the official theory believers and myself had in common. None of us were able to prove David guilty. In fact, no human being on earth can prove David is guilty of a double murder-suicide. So why should we act like David has been proven guilty? The question of what proves David guilty leads to the answer that David is innocent and has been falsely accused of a high crime. In the United States of America, we are all innocent until proven guilty. At least that is the America I strive to live in and to help keep alive. I have yet to find anyone who can prove David guilty, starting and ending with the investigative bodies who created the official theory and subsequent conclusion. At the very latest, the official theory began with the Apple Valley Police Department's press release on January 18, 2015 at 11:40 a.m., which was 10 minutes before David's body was examined. Captain John Burmell was listed as a contact person in the press release, and the document claimed what happened at 1051 Ramsdale Drive was the result of an apparent murder-suicide. Once the official theory began, investigating officials may have found it unnecessary to look into any possible alternative theories. As the investigation progressed, it was clear authorities could not find a motive for David committing the alleged crime. Additionally, authorities failed to tie David to the 3 questionable writings inside the Crowley home: the blood writing on the living room wall, the digital note on the kitchen island laptop, and the written note on a notepad in the office bedroom. Now, requests for handwriting comparisons were deemed unnecessary, yet all 3 writings were allegedly linked to David? Based on what? David's blood was found on the trigger and the magazine, but not on any bullets recovered. Even worse, authorities left the crime scene with 6 bullet casings and 4 spent bullets. Apparently, not one single person inside the Crowley house on January 17th or January 18th saw the bullet hole in the living room ceiling, which led to the bullet in the attic. The same is true of the bullet that rolled out of the living room carpet on January 20th. Both of these 2 later found bullets show disturbing DNA results. The bullet that rolled out of the carpet on January 20th, item 53, revealed a DNA profile matching Ranya's blood, but there was a second DNA profile on this bullet, and it wasn't from David or Kamel. The bullet found a month later on February 18th, item 57, matched David's DNA, but blood was not present on the spent round. Authorities did not know about item 53 or item 57 because they were not looking for them. Authorities had no clue that the bullet existed until they were informed by non-investigative bodies. Then there are the missing body parts. David's right hand, both of Kamel's hands, and Ranya's entire right arm were reportedly missing. Most of the heads of David and Kamel were also missing. Paleo, the family dog, is credited with the missing body parts, and apparently Ranya's fractured rib. Yet there is no indication Paleo deserves credit since dog feces tests were never conducted as far as we know. One of the biggest blood stains in the living room was never tested for DNA. There was a large circular blood stain on the lower right corner of this recliner. The blood was swabbed and labeled as item 34. This item was never tested for DNA results. Plain and simple, this was a staged event. Some believe David staged the scene, while others believe the scene was staged by parties other than David Crowley. Either way, I believe this was a staged event. I believe David has been falsely accused, and unless authorities can prove the double murder-suicide theory, this case should be reopened, and the status should be changed from exceptionally cleared to unsolved. Thank you all very much. That is the final chapter of the book, The Gray Stage by Greg Fernandez, coming out very, very soon. The rough cut just finished, and I hope to have the final version out soon. Thank you all. God bless.
Blood, diamond, bloody money, bloody contraband. Blood brothers killing brothers, what they got in their hand is another false flag tightly wrapped in a riddle. This is what I wouldn't believe when I used to be little, thinking the world's full of roses and marshmallow clouds. If I only knew then what I think I know now, would have had a jump start, gone far and away. Wouldn't put so many presents out on Christmas Day. Would have buried my headache so I could savor the moment. Going broke in a day to spend a year in a toilet. Just goes to show it's so materialistic. December 25th is not for Santa or wish list. With age you get wisdom if you're humble, behave. I can never take a bribe, but I'll take loose change. It's the world you're spinning around, and it makes you feel like you're off of the ground. What is everybody else talking, but you don't hear a sound? What is except the world you're spinning around? You hear me talk, I watch. Are you listening? You're watching the clock on the dot. Are you wishing that someone would give you a million wishes, a credit advance, and then your name is in the system? Don't worry, that's why things happen now. Independent mind thrown in the crapper now. Don't worry about the house in the hills. Don't worry about the bills that he kills. Don't you worry, that's why things happen now. All these independent minds are thrown in the crapper now. Don't worry about the house in the hills. Don't worry about the bills that he kills. It'll never be the same again. You can take it back, try to pretend. Look at what you're holding, turn to mold and paint it gold. When will it end? A world of warriors. Tell me what's the story of the pride and glory of whatever we're fighting for. It's like the price of love. You roll the dice enough, somehow you're coming up. Your love is on the run, but I can't release the pain, and I can never forget about the rain. It's like a bullet shatters every day. What's the cost of my living wage? Why do I got so much more to say? Stubborn ways in my older age. Why do you call me on the phone, never leaving me alone? Is there something I can do for you? I don't got more information. Thank you for your patience, but all I really want is the truth. So I keep it to myself, I won't tell nobody else. If I do, I know what you'll have to do. Someone keeps calling me a liar and call me a denier. The decider, he is really the fool. Wait another minute. Can you wait another minute? Wait another minute. In the darkness I see the moon. The sun is brightest in the afternoon. Wanna find out the truth, so we follow the clues. The only reason we rebel is cause there's too many rules.
So what you gonna do about it? You're gonna get us with that.
Building 7, 9/11 never made any sense. Since Building 7 is a smoking gun, it doesn't exist. Alex Jones, Stephen Jones, all they wanted was truth. Richard Gage, we are changed. 9/11 truth groups, they're just some people in the movement. It takes all of us to move this proof. This was an inside job, I'm talking my hop. Why did JFK get shot? Go ask the bank of mob who always seems to come out on top. Let's end the war and stop. There's a lesson for you to learn. Truth and knowledge, it makes me burn. Time to stand up for what is right. They cuffed a man and shot him New Year's night in a police state, but it's how they're trained. Either they're the ones to blame or it'll happen again. And even then the world won't be safe, cause a new world order won't let us escape. Take control of my life, but still it's up to me. I'm lazy to get back on my feet. We're making history. I see my friends just speak in the street. They know the mystery, the trickery of economies in the one world conspiracy. It's so easy to call me crazy. It's so easy to say I'm outrageous. It's a false flag overload. It's a false flag overload. Putting bombs bombs on Iraqi roads. For the soldiers we have sacrificed. All we're asking is the reason why. I see your false flags surrounding me. Putting cameras out on every street. Microphones in my underwear. Wiretaps in my pubic hair.
Hello, my name is Dan Hennon. This is Eternal Affairs Radio. Today is July 19th, 2019. Today's show will be focused on QAnon, President Trump, all of the things going on in the media, including the fake news. And we've got some interesting information for tonight's show. So let's start off with some strange things going on just as of today, and then we'll get to the breaking news. We've been covering the Jeffrey Epstein case for a while. I've been covering Nexium here for a while, and also now the latest Epstein Island with the things going on with Jeffrey Epstein in Florida, New York City, his ranch in New Mexico, and the pedophile island, the orgy island in the U.S. Virgin Islands. So we've been covering a lot of those types of things and the other types of strange anomalies that are in the news, along with the fake news. Now, we do know as of today, Ghislaine Maxwell, that's Robert Maxwell, the late Robert Maxwell's daughter, Ghislaine Maxwell, that's Epstein's former girlfriend, current friend, and alleged lead operator of the events going on with procuring young girls to the island in the island there in U.S. Virgin Islands. Ghislaine Maxwell had a non-profit charity, an environmental charity that had to do with the ocean that was raising money for environmental purposes, was abruptly shut down just today. And that was called Terra Mar. So Ghislaine Maxwell, for some reason, shut down her non-profit. Not sure if that has anything to do with anything. It's interesting to note nonetheless. Also today in Poughkeepsie, New York, a small plane crash happened with 4 passengers around 3 p.m. today. Small plane went down, 4 passengers. Those things are also items to note as far as nothing being in coincidence. Now, today being the 19th resembles two things. Two things is important when we talk about QAnon and the Q movement and what's going on with the Trump organization, with what's going on behind the scenes. Do you recall that it was two weeks ago today that Vice President Pence, his flight got turned around on his way to New Hampshire and recalled back? And immediately in the aftermath of that, it was very strange for multiple reasons, that whole scenario, that plane being brought back. But that was 2 weeks ago today. President Trump made an announcement in the aftermath of that strange scenario where he recalled that plane back and says, don't worry, we'll let everyone know in 7 to 10, I think 10 to, in a couple of weeks. In 2 weeks, in 10 days to 14 days, I believe. The public will find out what that was all about. Well, today's the day. We haven't heard anything. It's the 2-week limit today of when that strange plane was turned around on Trump's orders. It was done much like, remember when Pelosi was supposed to go to Europe on that flight around the vacation holiday time when Congress was shut down, and then he ordered her at the very last minute, actually with the passengers on the tarmac loaded up and ready to go, and he ordered that plane to not take off. And we know Pelosi is a black hat, bad, evil person. Now, for instance, with this Pence case, it was very odd because the media didn't know what to do with it. Trump recalled it back, never gave an answer, and now we hear today that we should have heard, but we didn't. But the question is, did we? Do we know what happened? and why that was called back. Trump is very good when he does his chess moves, and QAnon does his chess moves. They're supposed to read into some of these things. Several things did happen today that were, I think, lower caliber or mid-level caliber for this big boom that was supposed to be today. But I think the largest was what took place on a live stream broadcast with Field McConnell this afternoon. Field McConnell is in charge of the Able Danger website. He's a 9/11 truther, a former Air Force pilot, and he is a big time into 9/11 truth and exposing. He's a white hat, and he knows his stuff because he's connected to some very high people. He did a live stream today that live on the air announced, and he didn't mince any words, that Vice President Pence is a child pedophile and a child murderer. That took place in a live stream program. Now, if this isn't true, he's really going to catch some hell. Field McConnell is a very highly respected person and very high up. Now, the other question that we all have is Trump has spent the first 2 years, essentially, of his presidency, removing the infiltrators within his group and in his cabinet. And at one point, I think it was last week that, or 2 weeks ago, that some had suspected, the Anons on 8chan had suspected that there's still one or two left. There's still one or two rodents left within that presidential cabinet. Some have suspected Dan Coates, Director of National Intelligence, and the others have suspected Mr. Pence himself. Now, if this is the case, that Pence all along has been a black hat installed into this cabinet, and Trump has known it, he's been, because there are infiltrators within his very close circles. Pence could certainly be that person. Now, today's revelations of him being a pedophile, and Trump's main goal is to reduce the pedophiles and drain the swamp of the evil folks out there, that certainly could be the case. And that is going to wake a lot of people up, and the news is going to be big on the 19th. Now, this could be it. Now, let's say, for instance, it is. Let's say it's true, could answer the question, what Trump said about, we're going to have the answer in a couple of weeks about why that plane was recalled to New Hampshire that Pence was on. This may answer some of this because questions started to raise up. Now, Pence, if this is true, is going to be very interesting. Now, Field McConnell, his sister is Christine Marcy, the founder of SES. Christine Marcy is a black hat, always has been, going way back in time. She's a founder of SES. SES is the senior executive search that the White House and the State Department and top levels of government use when they need to bring someone in to be hired as an employee. It's like a LinkedIn top-level executive search for people that are LinkedIn that are made up entirely of folks that are already compromised. Folks already compromised. Get that, and I did not mince any words there. Folks are already compromised, tools and puppets that can be brought in for various jobs. And that's how a lot of this takes place at the high levels of government. You may have well-meaning people at the lower echelons of the FBI and the CIA and the State Department, but as you go up, you're only going to have certain people brought in to cover such positions in executive positions, manager and director positions. The SES has been using this for decades, this company, to do executive search to bring in people that are already controllable. And that's Christine Marcy is the founder of this. Christine Marcy is very close with Hillary Clinton. And Hillary Clinton is also they all use this SES system at high levels of government to bring in these corrupt people to begin with. They're already black hats to start with. And so Field McConnell called out to his very own sister and has cut ties 10 years ago and has been calling her out ever since. And so she is a black hat. The other person who's been covering the missing children and the pedophilia is a gentleman by the name of Timothy Holseth. Timothy Holseth has been running investigative services looking into the missing children, doing podcasts, doing radio shows, and getting the word out, and has become a targeted individual. So much, though, that the White House has him placed in protective custody. Donald Trump personally made sure that Timothy Holseth is placed in protective custody. Holseth is a Christian. He's been exposing pedophilia for a long time. And if you do not know Timothy Holseth's name or familiar with him, it is common, if you look him up, that he is commonly discredited on the website, YouTube pages, subscriber pages, and social media. That's how the deep state works. They really went after him when he started coming forward with some of these information. He's in protective custody, and Timothy Holseth's name came up today in the Field McConnell interview. That interview was a live stream. It's available now on YouTube to watch, and I believe it was an hour episode. You can look under Able Danger. That's A-B-L-E, Able, 2 words, Danger, D-A-N-G-E-R. Able Danger is a good channel on YouTube to follow and to subscribe to. Field McConnell brought up his sister Christine Marcy again today, and brought up the fact that Timothy Holseth is a white hat, a good guy, and so is Field McConnell, highly respected. And he, on the air today, called out Pence, Vice President Pence, as being a pedophile and a child murderer. So keep that in mind. Now, the other thing that I wanted to bring up today is I'm very active myself in the 9/11 Truth community, and I'm also very active in the QAnon community. And there's a lot of love lost between the two groups. There's not very many people who cross over. I'm one of the few that cross over and support both. Many people, and actually intelligent, smart researchers in the 9/11 Truth community, do not understand the QAnon phenomenon. They do not understand Trump's tweets. They do not understand the Q drops, the posts, mainly because Trump made promises to expose 9/11 and who really did it, and hasn't done that yet. And he's doing all this play with Israel, relocating Palestine as the capital, remapping the area for Golan Heights, and all of these things. These are things that I think are distractions. He's doing this to appease certain groups of people. They are not meant for, they're not serious things that he's doing. If you follow QAnon and you follow Trump, we know already that Q has stated, we are saving Israel for last. So anything that Trump says that's pro-Israel, keep in mind, it's tongue-in-cheek for it's probably distraction and redirection. Now, the fact that Field McConnell, as high up as he is in the 9/11 Truth movement, if he's working with Trump and the Q movement to expose this today nationally on a live stream broadcast about Pence, means he must have got the okay from somewhere to bring up this topic. And just to give comfort to the 9/11 truthers out there listening to this broadcast, that may be, I personally think that the 9/11 truth is several steps down on the bullet list of the things that Donald Trump wants to accomplish in his presidency. He will address it, and that will come out, the events of 9/11. But what he's dealing with has much higher priority. He's dealing with human trafficking, child trafficking, and sex trafficking, which is much, much larger than most of you understand. And so Q has been very good at alluding to us of how big and how deep this goes. And so Field McConnell, it's very encouraging to know, and I followed Field for a long time now. It's encouraging that if he certainly comes out and says this, and I think saying and making an allegation that deep, that strong, there must have been approval somewhere by the president. If he's working with the president and working with Q, and Q has stated that the 19th will be a big day, that certainly could be, I'm not saying that it is, but it certainly could be what was the big bomb that was dropped today. We also have to keep in mind that when Q has made several notions of when this stuff is going to start being exposed, and this is sick, these people are sick, he said repeatedly. This is going to be enough information to send 99% of the population to the hospital. This is going to be disgusting and involves very top people of government. That's why it does not surprise me if Pence is that bad guy that's been infiltrated all this time. And Trump knows it, and is using him as a pawn to get him exposed, and Field McConnell. So it's refreshing to know that if Field McConnell's in the mix and his background in 9/11, don't rule him out for hearing his name coming up down the road. So, on to some of the fake news. We just heard, if you looked at the news today, it's always interesting to log in the morning to check CNN, USA Today, the Washington Post, the New York Times, the LA. You've got to read some of these things because the fake news is so bad and so corrupt, it's almost laughable. Today, the new poll came out saying Michelle Obama is the most admired woman in the world. That we know is certainly fake news. And let's see. Let's see the other fake news. All right, we'll get to the others. The other, the main thing was the other day, if you follow QAnon, just last night we get the baby Q that made all the headlines, or was it Wednesday night, in North Carolina, Greenville, North Carolina. The Q baby. A father was holding up his child that had a T-shirt that said Trump on the front and a big giant Q on the back. That made the rounds on social media. So much so that it was trending on Twitter. #QBaby. And hopefully this was meant, I believe, to help push the question in the media to Donald Trump himself. Who is Q? Or even the question would be, is Q legit? All we keep hearing from the mainstream media is articles popping up all over the place saying Q is a LARP, Q is a shill, Q is a fake red herring. Those of us who follow Q and are close to it obviously know that's not the case because of all the recent proofs. In fact, just this last week there was 2 proofs itself proving Q is real, is correct, and is real. So that did not make the news. But what was on the headlines of the news this morning was Trump's campaign rally with everyone in the audience chanting, "Send her home, send her home." That was, mainstream media called it disgusting. That was lowbrow, and how dare they have chants and rallies that go on with this. So they were very much alluding to the fact that Trump encouraged this, started it, and it was under his direction that these chants came out. That's not the case. Trump didn't know what the chants were. It took him a while for him to understand what they were even chanting, and then he quickly cut them off and went on to his speech. So you've got to follow along his rallies. President Trump's rallies usually entail a large amount of people chanting something that goes on for several minutes. This was different. This rally on Wednesday night was different because he cut them off when they started chanting, "Send her home, send her home," and he moved on. He cut it off, told them to not knock it off, did not approve essentially, and then went on to his speech. But you won't hear that in the mainstream press. They'll make it sound like he encouraged it, he started it, and he loved it, and he thrived in it. That is not the case. So it was obviously about the representative from Minnesota, Ilhan Omar, and the comments that she made, the comments that Donald Trump made, and something about if they're illegal immigrants. If you don't like the country, you're free to leave. Illegal immigrants should leave. These are all fair things to say. I agree 100% with them. Illegal immigration, I would be for as well. That's illegal. That's a crime. Immigration is, Trump is all for it. So am I. But the illegal immigration is something different. Also, the fact, I agree with this, what Trump said, that if you don't like our country, you can freely leave. There's no one keeping you in. Leave anytime you want if you don't like the country. So he made comments like that. I agree with them. Mass media took them out of context, and that's how we get into this big distraction, taking us away, of course, from all the big things that are happening. So she comes home to Minnesota today, and the headlines say, "Welcome home" to the thunderous chant of "Welcome home, welcome home." Ilhan Omar enters Minnesota at the airport, and "welcome home" chants were being said about how much they love her. Now, this is also fake news. I'm in Minnesota myself, and she's not that well liked. Many people don't even know who she is or where she came from, as being such a young person without any background, and she won a district in the vote and became a Democratic representative, House of Representatives. And so they made it sound like there's hundreds and hundreds of people there supporting her. And this is very, very different. Remember, this is the mainstream news now, so watch the spin. Then we get the German Chancellor Angela Merkel, who makes headline news today by simply saying, "I stand with Ilhan Omar." But of course, it's written by the Washington Post. Big article today, Washington Post. They're all supporting Ilhan Omar. Now they got Angela Merkel. So they're tying in, other world leaders, essentially, to tie in, to say that they're showing their support for her. In other words, dissupport or disapproval for anything Donald Trump is always seen in the mainstream news is disapproval. And then we get an article from Mother Jones today, big headline that says, why are right-wing conspiracies so obsessive with pedophilia, sorry. So all these conspiracies that are coming out relate to pedophilia, Epstein, Nixium, Harvey Weinstein, and R. Kelly. Everything relates to pedophilia. Now that, to me, would be good. That would be good if we're exposing this. It's good the news is focusing on this. And it's good these people are being arrested. So that, to me, is something positive. Mainstream media now is lumping that into the conspiracy bucket, labeling it right-wing once again. I'm excited for these things. I'm not right-wing. I'm not left-wing. I'm not anything. I don't even vote. I'm not even a registered voter. I don't even vote for Trump. But I support Trump and support the QAnon movement. I'm certainly not a right-wing. I'm not a conspiracy theorist either. We're into the facts. We're exposing the facts here. Pedophilia is a problem, and pedophilia is potentially running this country with all the blackmail operations that are going on. Trump and the Q team and the Trump administration has chosen to make that their focus on cleaning up the deep state, which is really run on a blackmail operation for all those high up in business and those high up in the political hierarchy. We also have the Area 51 raids going on this week. The people are going to storm Area 51 in Nevada. Not sure what that was all about. I didn't follow it too well. I think that was another distraction for those. Back to Ilhan Omar. So remember, she's the Muslim woman in Minnesota who's allegedly married her brother. He's married twice. And her immigration status is in question. So the question is, should she be investigated? Should she be investigated? And I believe in the news today, it didn't make much news, but Trump was considering placing her under investigation for immigration because of her immigration status. Is she here legally? That's another big question. Was that vetted when she ran for Minnesota? Like I said, I'm from Minnesota. People didn't know who she even was, and she was very young. But she happened to win because she wasn't running against anyone that was good. Is she here illegally? Could be. Is she married to her brother? Could be. Now, the question was asked to her repeatedly, are you married to your very own brother just to gain citizenship here under some ruse? She commented by saying, I'm married to one person spiritually, I'm married to another person culturally. Well, now we got a problem. She's essentially admitting that she is married or was married twice or is currently married twice. Minnesota, once again, in Minnesota, that's not legal. We got multiple problems with her. So do not focus, I repeat, do not focus on the Ilhan Omar stuff in the news, but focus on the legitimate things that she should be investigated for. And the fact that a freshman representative in Congress is getting all this attention is very worrisome to me. Making the news all the time is very interesting. Now, on Twitter, Jake Tapper made an interesting tweet the other day. Yesterday, in fact, July 18th. If you go to Jake Tapper's account on July 18th, he left one-word tweet, said Evergreen. Now, Evergreen, we know, was Hillary's code name in the Secret Service. We know that Evergreen related to the secret CIA airline group back that was operating for a couple of decades down in southwest of the U.S., Southwest U.S. Evergreen Airlines. Evergreen was a CIA front company. Why would he tweet Evergreen with nothing else attached to it? Remember, Jake Tapper, another bad guy, black hat. Is that another code? Is that another code word? Is that something else? Now, Epstein, let's go back to the federal judge just yesterday in a 33-page document ordered no bail to let out Jeffrey Epstein until his trial. So he is going to be held. He wasn't going to be able to make bail and live in his 22-room townhouse, they call it, during his trial, even with armed guards to make sure nothing happened. He is a flight risk. He is, in everything, risk, this guy. So the question is, let's go back to his house. This New York City townhouse he allegedly lives in is huge. It's a 7-story building that used to be a school. He bought that. He didn't bought that. It was given to him, actually. It brings in the old Les Wexler connection as far as donating that property to him, and he got it essentially for free. We also know that Jeffrey Epstein is not a financier, doesn't have a degree. He was a teacher at one point at a school. No degree. He doesn't even have a job working as a financier. He's big and heavy into blackmail operations and has made his money big time. Now, let's go into, I touched a little bit on the 9/11 Truth crowd and what the issues are with them. 9/11 Truth is really big into, a big part of that is into Israel. Under Israel did it, the Israeli Mossad planted and did the detonations. And why aren't we going after Israel? I do believe personally we will once we get to that. But keep in mind, the QAnon movement is faith-based movement. The President Trump team, the cabinet, is faith-based. 9/11, the 9/11 Truth movement is not faith-based and are not comprised of Christian people. Many are, but it's not a faith-based. Now remember in the Q posts, faith-based is the large picture because 61 times it mentions the word pray. Pray. Pray for some of these things. Q mentions us to pray. I know there's over 3,000 drops by Q. 61 do mention the word pray. We are in, this is not a Democrat versus Republican. This is not a political theater that we're in. This is not conservative against progressive. This is evil versus good. This is good against evil. And that's why this is so nasty, the stuff that we're up against. The pedophilia, the satanic things that are going on. The evil. These are not just low-level criminals. These aren't high-level criminals. This is criminality being done to children that's over the top. Remember, 99% of the population will be in the hospital if they knew the truth. Q has even gone on to say that only 60% will even be revealed publicly of all what's going on. The public could not handle the truth. The public could not handle all of the sordid details of what's going on. And so Q, the Q team and President Trump know, I think from the studies that they have done, they know that they can only release to the public about 60% of what's really going on because that is not going to sit well. So also this week, here's some updates. We had Epstein with a fake passport. Now, why on earth would he have a fake passport on? Saudi Arabian passport. Very strange. But if you noticed, a couple days later, the fake passport then became a fake passport from Austria. So fake news, once again, they were able to eliminate Saudi Arabia out of the mix for some reason and say that his fake passport was in the case of a hijacking. He was able to use that, and it was Austrian. They must have got the Saudi Arabian mixed up. But that's what you've got to watch for the fake news. A lot of it is little things of truth mixed in with a lot of things of lies. Some were talking on the QAnon on the Discord channel, if you follow that Epstein heavily resembles Anthony Bourdain. Anthony Bourdain. If you hold those pictures up next to each other, some think that they were linked, possibly family, maybe even brothers. Anthony Bourdain was recently killed, murdered, and he was exposing some things, and he was doing some investigations with with children. Now, once again, you start covering that group, you start covering that ground, bad things happen. Was Anthony Bourdain connected in any way to Jeffrey Epstein? Who knows? But he did say that passport was to be used if he was ever hijacked or something to that effect. Now, the other thing that came out this week is the drone footage over Epstein Island. The drone footage. 5 or 6 videos came out on YouTube, and I would highly encourage folks to do this. Go to YouTube, type in drone footage Epstein Island, and look at the video footage. That's high-def video footage of a drone getting very close to the buildings, the roads, and the areas on that island to show people a real glimpse of what that island and the topography of that island. From Google Earth satellite image, if you zoom in, you do see a tennis court on the property. Innocently enough, you see a tennis court. But now what the drone footage shows on that particular location is very hilly and bumpy, and that tennis court, which looks from above as a tennis court, looks to be that people are talking about is some kind of painted tarp that's held up, and God only knows what's beneath that tarp. There's a tarp painted as a tennis court, just so Google Images picks it up on the satellite as an inconspicuous tennis court. But if you look, it does appear to be a painted tarp that's held up with something underneath it, possibly tunnels or some kind of sacrificial pit. Who knows what's beneath it? But if that is the case, there would not be any good or plausible reason for a tarp to be painted as a tennis court for that island. Whatever's underneath there, it can't be good. So that's what came up this last week. It also, there's more and more talk about satanic offerings on that island, on the Epstein Island, that it was not orgies. And once again, not orgies with consenting adults. These were orgies, sexual games with children, underage girls and boys. And if there was folks killed there, satanic offerings being done there, and they were shipping down folks on via an airplane on a Lolita Express to take part in these satanic rituals and whatever else was going on there, pedophilia, it certainly could be the case. The drone footage got very close in some of the artwork, some of the design, some of the areas that look like a mosque, that it looks like a Tanit worship, like a Tanit worship, or maybe worship Baal, as far as that mosque archway. That archway, when they looked into leading up to that temple area on the island, does look like the archway from the archway of Baal. That's B-A apostrophe A-L, Baal. It's from the Bible. It looks like what he did was build that archway to mimic that very same thing. We also know that the Ellen DeGeneres show, the background of her show has that similar painting, similar style show, same colors, that blue and white. It's very similar. Ellen, in my opinion, is also black hat, bad guy, and compromised. And she helps push the false narratives for the mass media. In fact, came through in the clutch with the Vegas shooting, with the security guard being able to interview him after he fled the country. And it was obviously not the same person on her show. So Ellen is part of the black hats. We also see outside on the pattern on the floor, the outside, let's call it the concrete perhaps, has some occult dealings with on some of those images, Epstein Island. So very much I would propose everyone to take a look at that. Now, we also get Planned Parenthood in the news. Planned Parenthood. We had the defunding in the news, and we know this is also black hat operation, evil operation, Planned Parenthood. Defunding is in the news. Recently, just yesterday, the president announced she will step down, and Planned Parenthood announced they're halting the use of the Title X family planning funds that they have available to them. And then just today, if you know the name David Daleiden, a judge confirmed today in a court of law, the judge confirmed that he does have the First Amendment rights to expose the revenues of the company Planned Parenthood that include the sales or the revenues broken down of the revenues for that nonprofit that include baby part sales. So he was after the research to find out what percent of that Planned Parenthood's revenues on an annual basis relate to baby part sales. They got after him for saying that's not part of your First Amendment rights to ask that question. And so now that got focused. That, of course, is not going to be in any mainstream news. We're going to now be able to see via FOIA requests the breakdown of Planned Parenthood revenues on an annual basis that relate to baby part sales, the sales of parts of fetuses. So let's move on to the other news that came out today that I think could also relate to the 19th of July, although I don't think this is it. Remember when Robert Mueller left a cell phone in the Oval Office prior to being appointed the special counsel by Trump? That actually came out in the book. The news broke on the book that, let's see, former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe wrote a book that mentions this instance where Mueller went into the Oval Office for a meeting with Rod Rosenstein, Robert Mueller, and President Trump to discuss being the secret counsel, and he left his phone on the chair when he left. And so this was making its rounds today. This is very important. Number one, you can't bring your wallet, keys, or a cell phone into the Oval Office. Those things all get left behind when you go in to meet in the Oval Office to prevent recording things, to prevent taking pictures, to prevent this very thing. Robert Mueller allegedly, keyword, had the recording on and left the cell phone and then came back to retrieve it later by saying, oops, I guess I forgot it. That was recording, and he wanted to hear the response from Trump and Rosenstein about his interview about being the special counsel. Now that is a no-no. We already know Mueller is a black hat, a bad guy, and part of the deep state. Now, of course, he knows Trump is a good guy, a white hat. He wanted to leave that cell phone behind on purpose, recording what they were talking about after he left. So that we know is true. That was in the book. I can't believe McCabe would make that up. So he said it in the book. The problem is it now faces scrutiny because people close to the situation know that cell phones cannot even be brought in. So how did he sneak it in? How did he get past the metal detectors? Was someone on the inside in the game to allow him to do this for this particular reason? That's all the questions that we have. Now, Mr. DeGenova broke the story on his website. That's a good one to follow. Now, once again, that's just allegations. But number one, you can't bring a cell phone into the Oval Office. If he did, more than likely, this is Mueller we're talking about. I'm sure, quite sure, that he did have it on recording. Now, so we also get the big news lately, last couple days, of the 4 horsewomen, the 4 witches, the 4 freshman House of Representatives around the nation that are causing all this stress. And they might be bad guys. They may be part of the deep state, and they're put there on purpose. Typically, freshmen who get voted in for the very first time, much of their job work are tasks that fly under the radar, that are low-level tasks that other people assign them to do. They're not on the mainstream media. They're not conducting interviews. They're not on the nightly news all of the time. But these 4 are. That's what you've got to ask yourself. Now, also in the news, Michael Cohen. Now there's another Michael Cohen link to Trump. Again in the news about his hush money for Stormy Daniels. Now, this is fake news. Once again, Michael Cohen was Trump's lawyer at one time. That's a fact. He isn't anymore, and somehow he was turned for compromise to be a bad guy. The Stormy Daniels case, remember the porn star linked to having sex with Trump that the liberals are pushing, that story is false also. Before that story even became big news, as it was rising up through the ranks of the news, she herself wrote a press release to say, I had nothing to do with him. I had some meetings, I had worked with him, but it's been nothing but pleasant. certainly didn't have sex. It certainly didn't have an affair. And I was not a prostitute for Donald Trump. She said she wanted to clear the air. This was the beginning of 2018 she wrote this. And so this is still in the news. So keep in mind the fake news, the mainstream media, the fake news, no, they are well aware of the gullible public. And they can reinsert these stories and get these stories through the turnstile and reintegrate them, and people will believe it. Stormy Daniels is false. Michael Cohen was his attorney. There was no hush money because he was never with Stormy Daniels. But Michael Cohen is now a bad guy, past working with Michael Avenatti and those things. He has been compromised. He is out of the mix. And if you don't recall, I know people's attention span is very, very low, but just a couple months ago, that case that went to trial for Trump against Stormy Daniels, Trump won that case. There was no connection to Stormy Daniels. In fact, the judge ordered Stormy Daniels to pay back all of Trump's legal fees in that settlement because there was no connection. So you've got to remember this. The mainstream media is not going to bring up the fact that Trump already won that lawsuit. Now, Trump went over and above to say, I don't want any of her dirty money. I don't want her money. So you know the Stormy Daniels case, you got to toss that out. There's no connection. There's nothing there. Like the Russian hoax. There's nothing there. There is no Stormy Daniels. They used her as a pawn. Now, the interesting thing is also in the news today, POTUS president, remember Secretary of Labor Alex Acosta stepped down. And guess who President nominated today to fill his spot? He nominated Eugene Scalia. Remember Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia that was killed on that ranch, was 187 on that ranch? Killed. Didn't die in his sleep. Outright killed. His son is going to be nominated to take over the spot of Secretary of Labor in the Trump cabinet. That is huge. Because getting him into play, when Trump knows the story, QAnon was the one who actually mentioned the fact that the 187 was done, was ordered by potentially Obama. But Scalia was murdered. If his son gets in, this could open a whole can of worms of that case. Now, we also get the latest updates on former Arkansas Senator Linda Collins Smith. Remember, she was murdered, shot twice. Former senator, very young, former senator of Arkansas, Linda Collins Smith, hyphenated last name. She was investigating and doing some research on children molestation cases and pedophilia cases in the state of Arkansas. She was getting a little too close. Obviously, someone took her out. But Trump today, no, I'm sorry, not Trump. The article in the FBI, the investigation, it reached the level now that they say that the FBI is going to be getting involved in that murder investigations for Linda Collins Smith. The FBI, and this is the good FBI. Remember, the FBI was bad for all those years, all those decades. Rotten to the core. There's still some black hats out there, but remember, as Q says, seventh floor is no more. That is all cleaned up, the seventh floor of the FBI there. So we got good guys running the show. They are going to get involved and investigate the real murder, and which is going to probably expose the corruption in the state of Arkansas that has been going on for decades. We all know that. Back to the DeGenova story, that Mueller, the day before he became the special counsel, left his phone in the Oval Office by mistake, is what he was saying. So that hit the news just today. And so look that up if you get a chance. Now, Kevin Spacey's in the news. Kevin Spacey's case was dropped, his groping case in Nantucket. Now, that's what the news is going to say. That's all over the headline news. The case was dropped. But if you read the case of why it was dropped, it was dropped because the complaining witness was, quote, unavailable. The complaining witness was unavailable in that case. Or they got flipped or turned or took the money instead. But that case, quote, went away. But we do have to remember the fact that Kevin Spacey was brought in and hauled into Scotland Yard to talk about his connections to Epstein. So Mr. Spacey is not off the hook. Unless he's singing, they would have let him off. That would have been a good move, a good chess move, saying that the complaining witness is unavailable. Let's let him off of the Nantucket groping charge and go after the big if he's going to spill his beans on the big stuff. That is just my opinion. Now, also today, which also could relate to the July 19th big news, there's an emergency prayer intervention today on Capitol Hill. A prayer intervention. What in the hell is that? So it included the House chaplain. Happened in Congress today. They brought in a Jesuit priest named Patrick Conroy. A Jesuit priest being brought in for a prayer intervention in the fact of an emergency prayer intervention has a lot of people thinking an exorcism took place. Did or could an exorcism taken place today on Capitol Hill? I'll leave that up to the listeners to decide. I'm not going to leave a comment on that. Obviously, nothing surprises me anymore. And also the Epstein case in Florida, just today, the Palm Beach Sheriff's Department is opening up an internal affairs investigation into the handling of the first Epstein case. And this was, I believe the handling is just referring to the sentencing. He was sentenced for the soliciting an underage prostitute, which we know is much more than that, but that's what he pled down to. And they had him serve 18 months in prison. But what actually happened in that case is that he served 13 months, but not in a prison, just 12 hours a day in that prison. He really had to check in there overnight and was free roaming during the day. The question is, why was that happening to a convicted pedophile? So the Sheriff's Department now, not Palm Beach, not the city of Palm Beach, Florida Police Department, but the county Sheriff's Department is going to open up an internal affairs to say who was in on this, who was compromised to allow this to happen. This is way out of the normal realm. And remember when Alex Acosta was doing this case, he said this is above my pay grade. He was told to leave it alone, and he let it go. So follow that. I would follow that case. I would also recommend watching an Epstein case on Lionel Nation. Lionel Nation, Lionel Nation. Lionel. It's only 19 minutes long. It basically gives a tutorial on the whole Epstein case. You know, Epstein got that job teaching in 1973 in New York City at the Dalton School. He's connected to Weinstein, connected to Les Wexler, and he didn't even have a degree to be able to teach. Now, one thing I found out today, going back to Epstein, you've got to look at his New Mexico ranch, the 10,000-acre ranch in suburban New Mexico. It's just outside of Santa Fe, 30 miles outside of Santa Fe, 37 miles east of Albuquerque. But if you use Google Earth to zoom in, you can see his ranch. It has a landing strip on that ranch. It looks like a dirt or a grass landing strip. 4,300 feet of a landing strip. That's pretty big. Planes can get in and out of there very undetected at 4,300 feet worth of a landing strip. It's also the thing that came of note to me, whether this relates or not, this is just my opinion. His ranch is really 250 miles to the north of his ranch is Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado Springs, and all the shenanigans going on in Colorado Springs with the underground bunkers, the underground tunnels. Cheyenne Mountain, same thing. People have connected a lot of that nefarious activities to child trafficking as well. It's only a hop, skip, and a jump away from Cheyenne Mountain area, Colorado Springs, in Colorado. Now, Q also says to follow the bloodline. follow the bloodline. He mentions Satan, and he mentions the keystone. Some, just this last couple of days, have put together some very nefarious connections with Epstein and what goes on in that island. And this is really getting out there now. And I don't mean getting out there as far as getting wild and wacky, but it's on the extreme and we cannot eliminate the fact that this is going on. Q made a post that says, "Does Satan exist? Follow the bloodline, the keystone, Satan." People have put together that they think what's going on at Epstein Island is you've got to follow Satan, the fallen angel. Satan, actually, the fallen angel. Follow that person's bloodline on Earth. And that bloodline can be connected to all these folks. Now, I am a Christian as far as anyone else, and I think that those first group of angels that were in heaven never spent any time on Earth anyway. So I don't believe that's going to exist. But if these people that are involved in the pedophilia and the satanic rituals and the satanic sacrifices going on in Epstein Island, if they truly believe they're part of that bloodline of Satan himself and have connected themselves on a direct line to Satan ancestry, that could be what they actually think. All right, now we get George Nader. George Nader, remember the infamous George Nader, busted back in 1985 with child porn. Charges were dropped. He eventually became the key witness in the Mueller investigation. Of all things, Robert Mueller brings in George Nader to be the key witness. That was strange for all of us who know Nader's background. He has been brought up now on new federal sealed indictments, including sex trafficking, obscenity, and child porn. This case is being handled in the Eastern District of Virginia. This just came out today. Keep in mind, this could be the other July 19th bomb that's dropped. It could be the additional charges. Remember, he was already arrested in June, George Nader. Remember, this is not Jerry Nadler. A lot of people are getting the names confused here with Nadler and Nader. This is George Nader. He was arrested in JFK Airport back in June of 2019. This was just last month. So these new charges today are additional, just new. Brand new charges. So I don't believe that's the bomb. I don't believe that's the bomb that dropped today that Q was speaking of. Now, keep in mind that George Nader was the one also in the photograph at the Virgin Islands, U.S. Virgin Islands, with Bill Clinton, Tony Podesta, and two others. Remember that photo that Rachel Chandler took at the U.S. Virgin Islands, allegedly outside of the Epstein Estates, Epstein Island? George Nader was in that photograph. Very strange. Now, the other thing is that when Robert Mueller brought him on, he kept the information secret about Nader's past, even allowing Nader to travel internationally, which should not have been the case for a convicted child pedophile. So that's the updates. That's the things going on. It will be interesting to see where all this leads because of all of this information. The number one thing to follow, what I would recommend to follow, is to watch that live stream of the interview today where Field McConnell, that's Field, like an actual field, first name is F-I-E-L-D. Field McConnell mentions live on the air that Vice President Pence is a pedophile and a child murderer. That's the thing that we've got to focus on. Because if that's not true, that's a huge accusation. We're talking slander, libel, defamation. And the news would be all over Field McConnell, and the fact that the mainstream would be able to take him down would be extra encouraging because he's a big 9/11 truther. But if he in fact got approval from the Q team and the Trump White House to go online and say that, knowing it's going to get questioned by the mainstream media. And if he approves it and says that's the case, and in fact, that's the case, I turned his plane around 2 weeks ago today, exactly 2 weeks ago today, well, we'll have the answers on a couple of things. We'll have the answers on a multitude of these things. The other answer that we'd have would be the suggestion by several folks that there is still an infiltrator or two within the White House. Dan Coates, possibly one of them. In fact, look for him to step down, and Vice President Pence. Now, we do know that Trump will probably have a very easy time winning the 2020 presidential election, the president election. The Democrats are beating themselves up, and there's no one left. You've just got you get nothing going on there. So Trump will win the 2020 election. The question will be who will be his vice president or his running mate. It won't be Pence, even if he's not this pedophile. Many are suspecting he'll go with a female vice president in the 2020 campaign and the election, which gets Pence out of the way. And if he is the bad guy, it took 2 years to oust him, and this is going to really not sit well in the media at all, because how are they going to spin this? And the other thing in the media that they cannot spin is when someone, it has to be done, someone in the media in a live press conference in front of Donald Trump has got to ask the question, is QAnon real? That's it. That's all the question that Trump is waiting for. He's been waiting 2 years for someone to ask this question. Technically a year and a half. He's been begging, wanting someone to ask the question. They will not ask it. They will not ask the question. You would think if it's not true, they'd ask it, and it would be put to bed. It would actually be a good reason to put that whole story to bed of QAnon if it was a fake, was a LARP, or it was a red herring. Because we know that QAnon is real, they're not going to ask that question. They already know the answer. So they can't ask it, which means sooner or later, Trump's going to have to bring it up. And then those against the QAnon movement are going to have to eat crow. So that's where we're at. Once again, my name is Dan Hennon. Today is July 19th, 2019. This is Eternal Affairs Radio. Please click the donate button on the top right of the page. And feel free to donate. We're always looking for additional funds to keep our programming alive and running and get further exposure for this show. And we also thank the donators who have donated in the past. We thank you for your donations. This is Dan Hennon. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please leave your comments below and leave any questions for next week's show. I can certainly answer them there. But I would follow the movements on the GLP, on the Godlike Productions, GLP.com website. There's a great thread on that about QAnon. There's also the 8chan boards if you want to follow the QAnon movements directly. There's also the Discord website that has a special channel dedicated to Q. And then there's also the qmap.pub website. Once again, thank you for listening.
Hello, my name is Dan Hennon. Today is July 30th, 2019. Joining me today will be Emmy Frost, former SRA, sexual ritualistic assault victim that has come forward and has been blowing the whistle on some of these events that have been going on. Lately, we've been seeing things in the news regarding the Epstein case, the Island, the Nexium case, the Keith Raniere case, the Harvey Weinstein case, the Kevin Spacey case, and all these are coming out. And Emmy was able to join me on a broadcast last June, actually last month, 5 weeks ago. And she was able to tell her own personal story coming out on an exclusive interview on YouTube with her personal experiences coming forward and going through the horrific abuse mentally, sexually, physically, emotionally, and everything else on her telling her side of the story on her own actual immediate family and what happened to her growing up and whatnot. today we're going to also use Emmy with the saga of the strange death of Nick Curtis that happened back in 1994. He was the son of Tony Curtis and the half sister of Jamie Lee Curtis, but Emmy knew Nick, knew his friends and buddies, and hung around with these guys, and is able to share a firsthand account of dealing with both dealing with Nick while he was alive, and also the strange circumstances surrounding his death and the aftermath of his death. Welcome to the show, Emmy.
Thank you so much, Dan. I'm glad I'm back.
Well, very good. This should be interesting because this information has not been out and has not come out publicly. But and some will look at this and say, why would I care? This is 1994. This is old news, ancient history. But as we did in the show last month, Emmy, this stuff is still just coming out, and it's not yet in the public eye. Some of these things that go on, and some of how these events are, either whether they're covered up or how the media puts a spin on them. But being able to talk to you here live on this broadcast for the show tonight, I think is going to be very helpful, because you ran in some pretty good circles with some very prominent folks living in the prominent area you did in the Northeast, and also with the connections that your father had, Robert Dunham, in Hollywood and whatnot, and how all these kind of things tie together. And so let's start with the Nick Curtis case. He was the son of Tony Curtis, and let's start with his case as far as how you got to know him, what age, whereabout you guys grew up, what city, state, and who some of the friends were, and then we'll get into the strange circumstances surrounding his death. Now, we're not calling it suspicious per se. It certainly is suspicious, but it could be what it is, and it certainly could be something that's not what it is. But the aftermath of what happened with Nick Curtis's death are certainly a half dozen or so other strange deaths that certainly would be compelling to be called strange, and some are even actually cold cases to this day that we'll be talking about tonight. So go ahead, Emmy. I'll just give you the floor and tell the listeners here a little bit about how you got to know Nick and some of the friends you hung out with.
Okay, well, it was my understanding that Nick was the son of actor Tony Curtis and I believe Leslie Allen is his mother, and she still lives on the Cape. I believe she runs an interior design company. And Tony Curtis, had been married, a slew of times, had multiple children with multiple women. And I had met Nick back around, I believe, 1985. I was about 15, almost 16 years old. And we used to just, hang out with the same friends, stuff like that. A lot of them were in the punk rock scene, skateboarders, skinhead, people like that. And I met him at a party, and, I didn't know who he was. He just seemed really, really nice. He was really, down to earth, kind of shy. A very, attractive kid, and a lot of girls liked him and stuff like that, but he just always, kind of stuck to himself. He was really into art and music, and at the time of his death, I believe he was going to the Museum School of Fine Arts in Boston. And he had been, some bands, and he was in a band called Earshot with some of my friends. So one of them had a music studio, I believe it was in Marston's Mills, Massachusetts, which is on Cape Cod. And so, we just kind of all hung out and, listened to music or skateboarded or went to parties and stuff like that. And, all my meetings and, meeting up with him, with Nick and all that, I'd never known him to do any hard drugs except maybe smoke pot. I didn't even ever see him drinking alcohol or anything like that. And for a little bit of time, I didn't even know who he was. I didn't know he was related to Tony Curtis or Jamie Lee Curtis. She's one of the most famous out of the Curtises, even, more so now than her dad. And, I found out he had a brother, he's got a younger brother named Ben and stuff like that. But, they just always seemed like an all-American type family or whatever, aside from knowing who his dad was and stuff like that. And so, yeah, I mean, and then
Just a step.
one summer.
Sorry, Amy, just to jump in here, I just wanted to say I've got a screenshot here showing that it mentions he was also a keyboard musician and artist who painted and drew in various media and also wrote poetry.
Mhm.
Interesting. Okay, go
And
ahead.
I believe that Tony Curtis was an artist. He had shown, I believe, some of his art in galleries and stuff. I think he might have even had a gallery showing on Cape Cod years ago. But yeah, he was. All his kids are very, artistic and stuff like that. So yeah, and then I believe his dad was trying to get Nick into acting, but I don't think Nick really wanted to like follow in his father's footsteps or anything like that. And then at one point in time, Ben even invited me to like go out to Los Angeles, and I don't know, I just turned him down. Like I didn't really know why he wanted me to go out there. Just kind of, he wanted to take me out to clubs and stuff, and I don't know, it just seemed a little weird because I didn't really know him. Like I knew his brother, and back in, I believe it was like 1991, I was living at this place called King's Landing on Cape Cod, and it's like lower income housing, and I was a single mom on welfare. It's like, going to Cape Cod Community College, trying to, better myself and all that. And I was dating this guy, there's this guy I used to date in high school named Jeb Gaffney. Jeb Gaffney had, a little bit of a criminal record, had been a drug addict in high school, and he was best friends with this kid, Josh Laban, who I briefly dated, like, when I was, like, a freshman in high school. And they both got heavily involved in drugs and drug dealing and things like that, and so their moms sent them to the straight program in Boston, which is, like, a rehab for, like, teenagers. And that's how they like got to know each other. And then I believe Josh was already friends with Nick Curtis because Josh's family was from Hollywood, and his grandmother had lived out there still back in the 80s when we graduated high school. And they hung out. They knew each other from back then, I think, when they were younger. And Josh's father was actually murdered in a jewelry store heist. He was a Jewish diamond dealer in either Los Angeles or Hollywood, and he ended up getting murdered, and I believe he was shot when Josh was about maybe 6 years old. And then after that, he ended up moving to Cape Cod, and then I'm not quite sure when Nick and his mom and his brother moved there, but I believe they did move there from California. So yeah, like we just kind of all hung out, in the same little circles and stuff like that. And then in July, I believe it was July 3rd, 1994, I was actually living on Cape Cod for the summer with the family of my boyfriend at the time, Chris Robichaux. And Chris Robichaux had told me that same summer that I found out that Nick had died of a heroin overdose that he was molested allegedly by Steven Spielberg. And so that's just really strange. But the whole thing about Nick was that, as I stated, like, I never knew him to do any kind of hard drugs. And I believe what happened was, like, that was the first time that Nick had ever shot up heroin, so he needed help, putting the whatever they put around your arm, and somebody actually injected him with the drugs. And Josh Laban allegedly was the one that sold him the bag of heroin, and it was labeled ready to die. And then there was a lot of pressure, I believe, from Tony Curtis and the Curtis family to have somebody pay, for next steps. So Josh Laban, as well as someone named John C. Denaro and possibly another female, were charged in his death. And Josh was charged with, I believe, involuntary manslaughter and served 4 months only. So, obviously that wasn't, to the satisfaction of the Curtis family. So years later, when I mentioned that my ex-boyfriend, Jeb Daphne had brought over this black book to my house back in 1991, and I said, "Where'd you get this?" And he said, "Oh, I stole it from Nick Curtis's house." And in the black book, it had a list of like various actors and musicians' names, and one of them was actor Christian Slater. Another one was actor Stephen Dorff, who at the time was only, I believe, 18 or 19. He just made his first movie playing like a boxer in South Africa or something. And then there was like Perry Farrell's number from the lead singer of Jane's Addiction. Now, the summer of 1988, Josh, Jeb, and Nick all went out to Hollywood for part of that summer to go stay with Josh's grandmother in Hollywood. And Jeb at the time had sent me a postcard from there, saying like, "Oh, we're having a good time." And then after they came back, I heard like these really weird stories of how they were brought to some like underground nightclub somewhere where they had like boys in cages and stuff, and they were asked to like touch these kids and stuff, and they said they felt really weird about the whole thing, so they just ended up like leaving. And it's kind of funny because back like around that same time, there was a book that came out written by Bret Easton Ellis called Less Than Zero. And he's the one that also wrote the book American Psycho, which was later made into a movie starring Christian Bale, where he played that like crazy psychotic psychopath guy who killed women. But in the Less Than Zero book, Bret Easton Ellis like talks about the nightclub scene in Los Angeles, and he, I believe, mentioned like little boys in cages and stuff, and people like putting their hands in and doing whatever they wanted to these kids, like, in a sexual manner and stuff like that.
So this was,
I don't know.
Emmy, was this in Hollywood or Los Angeles or whereabouts in California, and what year again?
I believe it was Los Angeles. Like, they were telling me about these, like, underground sex clubs and stuff, and I was like, how did you even get in, And they were like, well, Nick, like, knew somebody or something, and somehow they were able to get in. Because, with Nick's father being who he was and his sister being who she was, I mean, it's easy for, a half-brother of a famous person to get into some of these places, even if they are underage.
Yeah, it's interesting because you get these stories that come out that seem too fantastic or tall tales that people don't believe, and more than likely they are true. And then you get connections like with Stanley Kubrick doing the movie with Tom Cruise, and Eyes Wide Shut. That's portrayed as adults, consenting adults going to these parties and masquerade and whatnot. But it's really based potentially on some of this sacrificing and things done with underage kids and pedophilia. And Kubrick knew that he had to change, that theme or that narrative so it could go public. But some say that he was trying to expose some of this in Hollywood by making movies like that. And these kids, like you said, did he say that they were underage? They were boys, underage boys. Okay, so they certainly wouldn't be at a bar in a cage in goodwill, but they were being either paid to do that or something else. But either way, that's a nefarious type of a thing going on. And that type of thing, what we're trying to get a point across on this show is these kinds of things do go on. Whether people believe it or not is another story. But this is not just a tall tale. And so this story jives with the other, that book that you had mentioned, Less Than Zero, where some of the same kind of things take over. And now you also had mentioned that this person, this guy that you had once dated named Christopher. Now he said that he himself was sexually abused or abused by Steven Spielberg himself.
Yes.
He did. Okay.
Back in the summer of '94, when I was living in Wellfleet with his family, he had taken me on a walk through his neighborhood, and he like pointed out this house that was like sitting there. It was empty, like nobody was there at the time, and he told me this like fantastic story of how Steven Spielberg, like that was like his summer home or something, and how, you know, he had like invited him into his home, and then later he was sexually molested by him. And I was like, real, like, come on, I don't know, like it didn't seem like he would make up something like that. And so, you know, I mean, he mentioned it, and you know, I don't know, I didn't really believe him at the time. I just thought it was really weird. And so
how
yeah,
old was
I
he?
just kind of dismissed it.
Emmy, how old do you think he was when he mentioned this? When he was violated?
I believe he said he was 7 years old.
Okay, so very, very young, and that would make sense because you know we get these with these theories and allegations. You know, we still have this unsolved death of Heather O'Rourke from the old Poltergeist movie, the young actress who died at age 10, I believe. And Steven Spielberg was the director of that movie when she died there on the set, I believe. And there was some allegation of that as well, that he was doing things to her. So Spielberg's name has come up, I think, quite a bit. This just, I think, adds a little more punch to it with more of this information coming forward. But the behavior in Hollywood and all across, whether it's the entertainment business or the music business or the film business or whatever, even the things going on in Disney down in California and Florida, these are all a lot of very nefarious things going on behind closed doors and after the place is shut down and closed down. And that's why I think that these things go on, that it's hard for these kids to come forward and say anything. Number one, the people are powerful actors or powerful executives in Hollywood. They're not going to say anything. And number two, they're not going to believe that people will believe them or take them seriously. So this kind of, this all festers into it snowballs into such a large thing that they know that they, at one point, cannot be touched. So allegations can circle all they want, but no charges will ever come of it. If anything does happen, they'll be either let go or released. And, you know, we see this all the time. I mean, Kevin Spacey, just this last week, I think the charges of his groping charge in Nantucket was dropped. But who knows what's really behind that either. Mr. Spacey has been accused of multiple people of being this bad guy behind the scenes too, and this inappropriate person. And strangely enough, he was brought into Scotland Yard for some additional questioning on unrelated cases. So we can only hope that maybe he's spilling the beans on some of those bigger cases, and they let this groping charge go. But this goes way back. You know, your father was Robert Dunham, who was an actor, actor in movies. And as you had said on the previous show, that between cross-dressing and doing some of this weird sexual behavior that was very kind of common in the Hollywood scene. There's even allegations that, you know, Tony Curtis himself was into cross-dressing and whatnot. Have you heard anything, being friends with Nick or any of his associates, about the others in the Curtis family?
No, I mean, as far as Nick, like, he always spoke highly of his father, and as I stated to you before, recently I found out that when Tony Curtis died, he cut all of his children out of his will, and I guess Ben Curtis, his other son, was extremely upset. You know, he was expecting, you know, some kind of inheritance to, you know, take care of him or whatever. I mean, he's like, I believe, a successful businessman himself, but, you know, I mean, I believe Tony Curtis left all of his money to his, like, sixth wife, Jill, who's a horse rancher or something that rescues horses or something like that. So, yeah, I mean, I know, as I said, like, Jamie Lee Curtis didn't really have a good relationship with her father and just said he was never there for her and stuff like that. And, you know, I believe Tony Curtis wrote a book sometime before he died where he, you know, admitted to being bisexual and having, you know, encounters sexually with both men and women, like David Bowie and people like that. But, yeah, as you were saying, like, it just seemed more accepted amongst, you know, those kind of people. I mean, not like regular people, you know, that you meet every single day, just like the average person, but, you know, within these types, like Hollywood types, it's always some kind of seedy, homosexual, swinger parties or whatever.
Yeah, and that's one thing. I think that's how I think the media is very heavily involved with that, because when the Epstein Island and the Lolita Express and some of these stories with Harvey Weinstein were coming out, I take those as the narrative is that it's consenting adults having sex, having orgies, having parties, having whatever, or even if it's inappropriate, they're still adults. So you got the casting call on the couch from Weinstein and the Hollywood, how people get into the movies and how people get various jobs. They got to sleep their way up, whatever. I get all that, and that's not illegal. It's inappropriate, but it's not illegal. But what I think the media is missing is that this is the underage children, boys and girls. It's the under the age of consent, and they're being essentially trafficked, sex trafficked and whatnot else, and used and manipulated, and then thusly compromised, because no one's going to be able to really say anything about it. You really can't leak it. You can't go to the authorities. They're not going to necessarily believe you because you've got no evidence. And so, the Epstein case now, more and more as we're digging into this, is relating to children and underage girls. And the Nexium case out of Albany, New York, is entirely made up of underage children, boys and girls. And then we're hearing more and more with these other cases that are going on, including your own very own background growing up, being molested, abused, and raped and trafficked. Is a very common thing, because that's just the thing to do. That's the fun thing to do at the parties. You start engaging and bringing children into the events, and then there's also some speculation that to prevent them from talking or speaking is end up killing or sacrificing them, and then it solves the problem. And now we're stuck with this huge missing children's problem here in America, and who knows where all these kids are going, and it just leads to more speculation. Now, you had mentioned with back to Spielberg, he comes with a strange past himself. Tony Curtis now has this strange past, and now you've got this gentleman you dated, Christopher, back in the East Coast, comes across this black book. And so you said there's some various names, phone numbers, and connections in there, that was actually Nick Curtis's black book. Now, how old was Nick when he accumulated this black book? He was only 23 when he died, correct?
He, I believe, would have been about 20, almost 21 at that time. And so my ex-boyfriend Jeb had brought this book over to my home and showed it to me, and then ended up leaving it at my house. So I held on to it, and I actually did call some of the phone numbers, and I got through to Christian Slater's voicemail, and it was his voice. It was just really weird. And then I mentioned it, years and years later, maybe 2010 or so, to Ben Curtis just via a Facebook message, and we were talking back and forth one day, and I just happened to say, hey, I just forgot all about this, but years ago, Jeb had stolen this black address book from your brother, or from your house, and brought it to my house, and I didn't know what that was all about. And at that point, Ben said, well, Josh and Jeb will be dead soon enough, and he was really still angry at Josh Lavin.
So can you say that? Can you say that again, Emmy? Can you repeat that last sentence for the listeners may not have heard it? What was Ben's? This was Ben's quote.
Yeah,
Ben Curtis
said that Josh and Jeb would be dead soon enough, after I told him that Jeb had stolen this black book back in 1991. So this was about 2010 or so when I told him, meaning Ben, and then almost exactly a year later, Jeb Gaffney was found dead in Cambodia while he was on vacation there. And he had been in prison for arson and some other drug charges and things back in the 90s, and he served time but was able later to go to college and graduate and end up becoming a psychologist. after he got out of prison, and then had gotten this job at a university out in the Midwest. So he was gonna go on this trip to Cambodia, which was really weird. Just like, well, I don't know why he picked Cambodia, and he went by himself. But then I was told by this woman from California named Ruth Harris that although we were told Jeff Gaffney died of a heart attack and he was rushed to Bangkok, Thailand, to a hospital and died en route or something, Ruth Harris told me that Jeff Gaffney was beaten to death and that she had actually been on the phone with him while he was in his hotel room. And that was May 2011, and then almost a year exactly after that, Josh Laban was killed in a hit and run in Santa Cruz, California on Highway 1. And he was walking, and he was actually doing a fundraiser, like he was raising money for a scholarship in memory of my ex-boyfriend, and was killed while he was walking his bicycle with his dog, and was hit from behind by a green Dodge pickup truck, and they never found out who did it, and it's a cold case to this day. And that summer in July, I went to Josh's memorial in Cape Cod. That was the last time I was there, and his mother, Jennifer, told me that she got, like, death threats from somebody saying, like, not to look into her son's death. And she had confided that in me, and then she said that she thought it was from the Curtis family, and none of them came to his memorial or anything like that, obviously. And then she asked me, after I told her about the weird messaging between me and Ben back and forth about how he said they're going to be dead soon enough, and then they were back to back like a year later, she asked me to speak to the detective that was handling her son's death out in California. And it was this guy named Detective Troy from the California Highway Patrol, or CHP, like Chips back in the day.
Okay.
The same thing. And I spoke to him, as well as Jennifer, Josh's mom, told me if I could speak to a particular person in the district attorney's office. So, I did that, and that was maybe 6-7 years ago, and nothing ever, became of it. Like, the detective asked me to send him copies of these, Facebook messages that Ben Curtis had sent me, which I did, and then I just never heard anything back. I called him a few times, left messages, never got any return calls. So, yeah, I mean, it just seemed like they weren't going to really look into it, or maybe they didn't, thought it was coincidence or whatever. And, I try to tell them, like, other stuff about, things I've been through, and they weren't really interested in, or, what kind of connections I had made between this and this or whatever. And I don't know, they just were like, well, it's kind of like circumstantial and stuff like that.
So that's interesting, and this is Joshua Laban, who was 23 years old at the time, who was actually blamed for the death of Nick Curtis. He was actually very good friends with him, but he was charged because he was the one who sold or provided the heroin to him. And like you said, that you knew him, he probably wasn't a heroin user or a drug user at all. And this may have been the first time, but he now gets ordered held on $5,000 bail after pleading innocent. And so this is Laban, who was 23 at the time. So this is the individual who, what year time frame was he hit and killed on the side of a road by a pickup truck?
It was May, and I believe it was 2012.
Okay, so recently, so we're talking seven years ago, and all these years had passed, and nothing happened to him, even though they thought potentially he was at fault, or if the Curtis family thought that he was somehow behind it, they may have dealt with him sooner. But then once you mentioned that Facebook post to the brother Ben, and he said they'll be dead soon, that's when he was circumstantially, coincidentally hit by a pickup truck and refused to be investigated by police, it sounds like to me. You even made calls with information about the case, and your information was ignored, was it not?
Yeah, that's what it seemed like.
Now, why would his mother get death threats? I'm wondering if her son was killed by a hit-and-run driver on the side of a road on a seemingly just a simple mistake. Why would she get death threats then to hush this over and go along with the official narrative and not dig into it with prying eyes into this case? So this was. Do you think this was a hit on Josh?
I believe so.
Well, it does
I really
certainly
do,
seem like it.
because-
It certainly seems like it to me. Just it doesn't take a genius to put two and two together. But you're probably
Yeah,
considered a conspiracy theorist if you go pushing that narrative that it was a hit. Okay.
Yeah, because you have a good point. Like, why would somebody be calling his mom with death threats if it was just an accident, you know, and people didn't come forward because they were too scared or whatever, you know, to get charged. But they did do searches of, you know, all these green Dodge pickup trucks in the area. They searched, you know, like all the auto body shops because they said there's got to be like front end damage and all that, and nothing was ever found. So, you know, they thought maybe it was a drunk driver or, you know, just somebody didn't see him or whatever, but they didn't find his body for a couple of days.
How did they
if I
find?
remember correctly.
How did they find the body then? Afterwards.
Well, he had brought a dog with him on his trip, and he had a little basket that the dog would sit in. It was like a little, like a Toto dog, like from the Wizard of Oz. He named it Ozzyette. And I guess the dog lived, and so there was this woman that was riding her bike down Highway 1 with her husband, like, heard a dog barking, and so she, like, you know, stopped her bicycle and took a look, and then went down this little ravine, and then found Josh's body, and the dog led her to the body. So, you know, then she went ahead and, you know, called California Highway Patrol, and they came out and, you know, got him and stuff, and thought he was like a homeless guy or something. But I did call, I believe it was the Sacramento Bee newspaper, and just, you know, to clarify that he wasn't just some homeless guy. He was out doing a fundraiser for my ex-boyfriend's, like, memorial scholarship at this college where he got a job as a psychology professor. So, yeah, it's just very, very weird how they, you know, they just both died in the same month, 1 year apart. And I believe the time that Ben Curtis said that to me was actually in May of the previous year, so that would have been like 2010. So, you know, I believe that, you know, they're a powerful family. I mean, they've got a lot of money, and, you know, it's just, I don't think they're ever going to find out the truth, to be honest.
Yeah, it sounds like one of those cases where it's meant to be shut up and move forward. The case closed, and that is it. And even with looking at the website now for Nick's death, even when they arrived, they said right away that no foul play was suspected here on this heroin death. But they say that emergency workers responded early Saturday morning to a report of someone choking. And so they said it basically someone was choking, having a seizure, and then he was pronounced dead already at 9:15 a.m. Curtis lived in Dennis on Cape Cod and was a student at the School of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. And so that's very, very strange. But he was the one who, Nick himself was part of the group that went into some of those bars in Hollywood and saw this, the kids in the cages at underground bars. He actually witnessed some of this.
Yeah.
Do you think that Nick would be the type of person to have eventually come forward and maybe spill the beans on some of this, or is he just he didn't really care and he let that all go? He just thought it was strange and was just actually died of a heroin, essentially an overdose or whatever that was, and it was probably all the chances was it was legit perhaps.
I'm not sure. I mean, I know that just from my dealings with him, like, he kind of seemed like he put his father on a pedestal. I mean, I never heard him like speak badly about his dad or anything like that. So, you know, maybe like years later or something, if he was still alive, you know, who knows?
Okay. Yeah, it's that.
Because you know, nowadays so many people are coming out, you know, telling people the truth about what you know they've been through or abuse they've been through as children, and you know, I never thought that Nick was abused. He could have been. I don't know. We never were like friends like that where we talk about that kind of thing. Like it was just more like hanging out, you know, playing music, smoking weed, and just running around, you know, with all our friends and stuff.
And was that black book his, or did he get that from someone else? Do you know? Because you saw it, right?
I don't know. It just didn't seem like something that he'd have, you know, like maybe I don't know. Like he just didn't seem like some like shady person. Like he just really seemed like a really cool guy, you know, really nice and stuff. But yeah, like what you said about like how they said there was no foul play suspected in his death, then why did they end up charging Josh like later? You know, that doesn't really make sense.
Yeah, the article is strange the way it's written, because it does say that he was sleeping at a friend's house when he had a seizure, you know, died after basically suffering from that seizure. But it says the secretary for Tony Curtis says she said, Jennifer Walsh, a secretary for Tony Curtis, said that he was sleeping at a friend's house, had a seizure, and subsequently died. And she says, we don't know, quote, if we don't know anything more than that, and I don't know if we ever will, she said. That's a strange quote to make, and then the medical examiner's office, which performed the autopsy, did not return a telephone message on Tuesday. And remember, this is 1994, but it does sound like they shut it down right after. She's leaving open the possibility that we'll never know what happened. The medical examiner didn't return the call, and very, very strange. I'd like to know more about that black book and how that all comes into play, because Ben certainly had an interest in that. Was he interested in getting that book, or was he surprised that Nick even had a book like that?
He seemed to know about it. Like he wasn't like, what are you talking about? Like he seemed like he knew about this book, or maybe heard about it or something, but he definitely didn't, you know, say what are you talking about. So he just was like, yeah, you know, they're gonna end up dead. And he did express like how he was angry with Josh and stuff like that, and how he's like a piece of shit and this and that, and if it wasn't for him, his brother wouldn't be dead and stuff like that. But when Nick died, what I heard from like my own personal, like, you know, mutual friends is that he started having a seizure, you know, within minutes of getting injected with heroin, and then he was like foaming at the mouth, and he was like choking on this foam or whatever, and then he just, you know, dropped dead. And then I believe they said it was an overdose. So, you know, I don't know anything about heroin or how people, you know, react, or maybe they, you know, put too much in there or something for him, or maybe he just was an unlucky person and, you know, just didn't agree with him for some reason.
Yeah, that's strange, because were the two folks there then when they called for 911, or they didn't leave? Did they? He basically was foaming at the mouth. They called right there, and they didn't know what was going on. And you know, you get the case almost like some of these overdoses where they're inadvertently given a hot shot, they call it, where it's a lethal dose of heroin, and you instantly die. You know. And so that could be something like that. I doubt that was the case, unless it was perhaps laced and they didn't, you know about it. You know, who knows? But the bag was called "Ready to Die," was the label of that heroin, right?
Correct.
That was the package. Oh, interesting. It says, yeah, Joshua Lavin, 23, and then John DeNiro, age 26, were both held, along with a third person who has not yet been named. And that's what you mentioned was possibly that woman.
Yeah. And they never said who she was. I believe that I've seen photos of her, and she doesn't really look familiar to me. But the one thing that I forgot to mention earlier was that back in the day when I used to hang out with Nick and all them on Main Street in Hyannis, there was somebody that was asking us kids, like Nick hung out with a lot of like sort of like juvenile delinquents, skater kids, runaways, and I actually was a runaway. So that's why I was like hanging out with a lot of these kids. And there was somebody, I never found out who, was offering kids, like street kids, money to do child porn. And I believe Nick knew some of these people, and I knew some other people that actually like posed for the photos, and they asked me to do it, and I was like, no. Like they said, there's some guy that wanted to like meet me and some friends in the woods, and I don't know, it just seemed really, really creepy. So I just like stayed away from all that stuff. But yeah, like a lot of them knew Nick Curtis, and I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting. It certainly is interesting, all the connections. Go ahead.
I was going to say one of our mutual friends, this kid Kevin, ended up hanging himself in the woods in Hyannis because he was caught with child porn, and he was one of the people like involved in sort of like, I believe, recruiting like runaways for porn, for child porn with somebody. Never found out who, never wanted to know who at the time. Like, it just seemed really, really bizarre. I didn't want to, like, you know, I'd already been involved in that before, so I was running away to avoid avoid all that stuff. So.
And that does seem to be the big the feeding grounds of that whole industry, because you're able to exploit the youths who don't have places to go or support system or money, and they're looking for money, and then they get these folks involved in these things, and they're also expendable. Whereas whether it's a snuff film or something else to that effect, you're able to kill these people off, and because they're missing or not really accounted for or runaways, there's no real repercussions because they value those lives as not at a normal life, less than normal life, that it's not really valued or anything. So that's how they get away with some of this. Like with the Nexium case, they're getting the underage Mexican girls that are underage and bringing them in with a false visa, and then using the sex to exploit them, to say if you tell, go to the police, we'll have you deported back because you're here illegally in the first place. And so they've got nowhere to turn. What else can they do? So they stay with it and keep going along with it. So we're finding more and more out of those types of scenarios, but and it's very prevalent in that whole Boston, Massachusetts area, that New England area. You've got that old money in there, and you've got a lot of wealth, and that's how some of this all cultivates and keeps going, because this is, and now you bring up potentially law enforcement or detectives letting some of these cases go, or maybe looking the other way, so some of these cases either get dropped or pushed aside or turn into a cold case, and then you've got honest to goodness people, citizens calling in with actual tips to solve some of these things, and they are promptly ignored.
And like, as you know, the last like week or two, Keith Renier wasn't he beat up in prison?
Well, they found Epstein beat up and found in a fetal position, nearly unconscious in his New York cell after being placed. He wasn't allowed bail to leave, and so they did put him in there, but the rumor has it that could have been a beating, what I would call allowed by the prison guards, because there was a group of folks who do this, the child molestation beatings. They're in the prison. They'll go after those and target those types of people. And if the guards allow, after hours or whatever, to allow a bunch of guys into that room, they can have their way with him. And he had a bruised, I think, neck, and was beaten up pretty good. So who knows what happened to him in there. But I think that was one of those unwritten rules that the guards will allow him in there, do their job, and get him out of there. And he was barely alive. But that's Jeffrey Epstein, correct?
Well, I swear that Keith Rainier was also beat up in prison.
Well, he could very well. I haven't heard anything. I haven't heard anything on that, and we allow the listeners here to the show to please comment below if they have heard that. I've followed the Nexium case pretty good, and there was six defendants in that case, all women except for Keith, and they all turned and pled down and pled guilty to their charges and left Keith Raniere left all alone. So he took all the charges himself, and he was running a huge scam with those kids, along with the Bronfman sisters and the Salzman, Nancy and Laura Salzman, and Allison Mack, which leads back to the Hollywood, gets back into your connections to the Rachel Chandler connections on Epstein Island, and all of these shenanigans that tie back. And with Jeffrey Epstein was using his former girlfriend Ghislaine Maxwell as his recruiter. Essentially, he was running the show, bringing these girls in, and her father was longtime Robert Maxwell, Israeli Mossad, MI6 spy, CIA connection, and he goes way back in spy folklore. Essentially, that's Robert Maxwell, and he was the one who died in, I think, the early 90s. They found his body near his boat in a lake. His body was floating nude in a lake, and that's Robert Maxwell. So his daughter, who they think could have been, getting these young girls, the kids, to be recruiting for some of the sex over here in the U.S., she was already potentially doing that and involved back then, because she knew from her father the game of blackmail and how successful it works. That was him.
Yeah, because he worked for the CIA or something, and because I swear when I saw the Netflix documentary Wormwood, did you watch that?
Yes.
About the doctor, the biologist in Fort Detrick?
Yeah, Frank Olson.
Frank Olson, the one that jumped out of the window, or now they say he was pushed by, these men in suits, and they were giving him LSD and bringing him to Deep Creek Lake in Maryland for, like, these weird meetings and stuff, and dosing him and everything. Like, I swear the Maxwell was in part of that documentary or something.
Yeah, I'd like to go back and
the first time I heard of that.
Some of that I'd like to watch again. I think that it's a 6-episode series on Netflix called Wormwood, and that's very good. It goes very in depth about the Frank Olson death and the strange, they called it a suicide. He jumped out of a 8th-story window or something after they say he was high on LSD, but later evidence shows that window was broke ahead of time, and he was possibly already dead when they threw his body overboard. But they blamed it on that, and they said that they stuck to that story to this day to the family. And the son, Eric, is the one who's doing the documentary.
He sued the government.
He knew
I
it.
think he only got $200,000.
It never added up, and this was in the 50s, and so.
Yeah.
And then they found out too that they were doing. He exposed all this other human experimentation on unwitting victims, human civilians, U.S. American civilians were being given various tests and testing on some of these at the behest of CIA budget, experimentation, and so that was all very strange.
Back to MK Ultra.
And it gets back to the MK Ultra, because these guys were into wanting to learn. This is all Cold War era, and coming on the heels of World War II, and they wanted all this information, and they knew they could get it because of the unlimited funds they had. So they started just playing around and experimenting, using the American as guinea pigs, whether they were aware of it or not. And yeah, Robert Maxwell has a long, deep past, and that's his daughter is Ghislaine, who is, and she needed some support when her father died. Jeffrey Epstein was there, came into his open arms and helped her through the sadness of dealing with the death, and they became boyfriend, girlfriend, and next thing you know, she becomes the main procurer of the underage girls to give him his massages in his house in his hotel, and that only led to God only knows what went on there at Epstein Island with all the new information about those tunnels underneath the island with those recent drone footage that shows ventilation and vents, air vents coming up from the ground where there's no buildings. And so those are air ventilation, air ducts. And so who knows what was all going on there. And it was Epstein that poured about $29 million into closing those tunnels up and destroying those tunnels. And I think they're all filled up now because this may have been a year ago. So if investigations get out there to those tunnels, there'll be nothing theirs left, as I think the word was 29 million is what QAnon mentioned, what was spent on filling up those tunnels on that island with concrete or whatever they used to destroy the evidence. And so it's very interesting. And once we found out just last week alone here, and I know we've just got a few minutes left here on the show, the Disney Big Red Boat cruises would make stops at a location near the Epstein Island, and they offered tours for kids for doing some snorkeling and looking at the colorful fish. And the stop was actually at the Epstein Island. But the thing that was strange with that is the log records show, if you go back in time and look at the prices for these excursions, these cruise excursions, that children were able to go on these snorkeling cruises aged 7 through 9 were considered children and paid a certain rate, and the children aged 10 and above were considered adults. And I think what they did for that is if they ever got into trouble, I think they wanted to head that off. If they ever got into trouble about dealing with kids or pedophilia or children on the island, they would be able to explain the fact that they had a large number of adults doing these excursions along with a small number of children, but the log records would show the adults are just simply considered 10 or over. And so that really is starting to blow open with this whole Epstein case, because that shows then that Disney is involved, which we know just from last week with another person, their senior vice president there sent to prison for child porn. This goes deep. We're talking Hollywood, we're talking Disney, going into all of this stuff. And Isaac Cappy was true. He was exposing people and what they were doing and what was all happening. And the biggest name that he went after, I think, was Seth Green and Tom Hanks. And now what we get here in the news this last week is Tom Hanks playing this huge new role of a new movie called Mr. Rogers. And he also did the movie The Man with One Red Shoe, and we all know what the red shoes represent with pedophilia as well. So if you start putting the connections together and connecting the dots of what's really going on here, along with all of these strange deaths that you mentioned here, Emmy, with the poor follow-up, the poor investigation skills, or these cases that are simply just shut down and forgotten about, or they sit there as a cold case forever. Hopefully an episode like this will get others to look into these cases that are 20 years old or so, 25 years old, and start looking into this. For instance, that mother who was told to shut up and was threatened about looking into her son's death. It would make her question her, why would that take place? Why would something like that even happen? And who's ordering and who's making these phone calls? Who's really the leaders of the pulling the strings of the puppet strings here in Hollywood and with all this big money behind the scenes. That's really what I'm hoping for on an episode like this, is that people can get in and start investigating some of these older cases that now have legs that I think can take off, and people can research. We've got a lot of good researchers out there that can look up these types of things, and thank you, Emmy Frost, for bringing a lot of this to our attention today.
You're very welcome.
And I've got a picture, once again, if you're not familiar with Emmy, here's a picture of her father, Robert Dunham, American actor, entrepreneur, writer, race car driver, journalist, and a U.S. Marine. And but what you think is he was working in possibly intelligence for many years himself, and a lot of these jobs were either covers for that or roles to help cover up that and help prove his image as a good, clean-cut guy, and that was certainly not the case with the abuse that he suffered growing up. Here's another photo of your father, Robert Dunham, holding you here out front of the steps as a young girl. Looks like you're maybe 2 or 3 years old. So thanks for sharing some of these photos. But any final thoughts today on this topic, Emmy?
Well, it's just always dealing with so many losses in my life, and you know, it's just crazy how so many people I used to hang out with are just no longer there. I mean, the one thing that I didn't mention was the father of one of my children was found dead of a heroin overdose on Cape Cod.
Okay.
With the same people that hung out with Nick Curtis. And he was found dead, I believe, June, gosh, it must have been like 2010 or 2011. So it's all around the same time. And I never knew him to do heroin either. And this guy I knew was living with him, and I believe it was in Centerville, which is right next to Hyannis. And it was they'd just gone out to celebrate Michael Tupper's birthday, and Michael is the father of my oldest daughter, Samantha. And my friend Sean said, well, he went downstairs to go play his guitar, and then all of a sudden he heard like the amp just like making this weird sound, so he went downstairs and found him, you know, dead with a needle sticking out of his arm, and said that he did, you know, try to do like CPR and stuff on him, and but he didn't make it, and that just was really, you know, really weird. And they were speculating suicide, speculating just a, you know, accident, overdose. I don't know. I never really got like the real story on that. So that's just another death to add to all the other deaths that I've had to deal with.
Yeah, it's not fun, and I cannot even pretend to know what you're going through, because I do not. And you've gotten through a lot and gone through a lot and survived, and as a survivor and coming forward as a whistleblower that you've done, this is not an easy task, but we do applaud your efforts. It makes one wonder when you see some of these other stories as well. We mentioned this in the first broadcast. The JonBenet Ramsey, the Madeleine McCann, the strange disappearance of Madeleine McCann in that location in, I think, Portugal, when she was, what, five years old. And now it even asks, it makes you wonder when you hear cases of the teenage brothers, for instance, the Menendez brothers, you know, killing their parents, and how strange that is. But what's really behind, you know, what's really behind some of these things? What's really going on here that would make you do that? Is it just crazy psycho people? More than likely, no. They could have been involved with the same types of things we're talking about here. And when you're talking about trying to run away, leave, or get out of a situation that's bad or horrendous, what are your options? And it makes you think twice when you see these Menendez brothers, what was really going on there with those parents? What were they involved in or messed up with? Who knows?
Yeah, I believe they said they were sexually abused.
And see, that would make sense rationally in my mind to get out of a situation like that you end it once and for all, you kill them. But how it's portrayed once again on television and the news is that these two are sick criminals who are nuts and out of their minds, but they may be more sane than we realize when you know the full story, the backstory, because the mainstream media will not touch these stories. They will not touch these stories with a 10-foot pole on any of it. So it's going to be interesting when more and more of these indictments come out here with Q and what's going on here with some of these other cases, because like Q had says, we're only going to be able to issue and get out into the public roughly 60% of what's going on. The public simply can't handle anything more than that.
Yeah.
The public is not going to be able to handle the true, ugly truth of these situations. So even if they get 60% out there, it's going to, I think, shock the general unsuspecting public who doesn't think this stuff goes on. Well, thanks for your time again, Emmy. I certainly respect you, number one, and applaud your efforts, and I thank you for coming on the show. I'd like to do another show with you again here next month, perhaps, on a different topic altogether, or on a follow-up on this one. You certainly have a lot to share with your background.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. I really appreciate you having me on the show again.
All right. Thanks. And then I'll get this out there, and hopefully the listeners can leave comments and ask questions to Emmy. Leave comments below in the comment section, and please feel free to Hello, my name is Dan Hennon. Today is August 27th, 2019, and we've got a broadcast on current events with former counterintelligence agent Greg Ford. Welcome to the show, Greg.
Always glad to be here, Dan.
Well, very good. As our listeners are well aware of, there's lots of things going on here in the current events over this last, 8 months to 12 months has been a non-stop affair of things in the news, and it's hard for the average American public, citizen to decipher what's true, what's not, what we're being told, what's not right, what's not true, what is true, and what's try to break out the half-truths that we've also been told from the mainstream media. Now, tonight's show, Greg, we've got a cast of characters that you're going to kind of segue us into here, with some of these same recurring names that we've heard from over the years, all tying off from Jeffrey Epstein once again. And should I call him the late Jeffrey Epstein? What's your thoughts on the whole Epstein case? Is Mr. Epstein alive or dead? Was he taken out of there? Was he killed? Was he murdered? We know it was no suicide. I don't believe. I don't believe so anyway. But what are your thoughts? You've got a background in some of this. Yeah, you've got a background in this, Greg, so it may help us with what are your thoughts on, first of all, the strange death?
Well, let me see. By the way, it is cold and foggy out here in California. And I want everybody to know that we have down at a place called Mavericks, right down the coast from me, the waves are about 100 feet high right now. Somewhere between 70 and 100 feet high, okay? So it's a wild place, all right? So, and of course, that's nothing compared to what we're gonna talk about tonight on the show, Dan. So, and by the way, a couple of things I wanted to get out today. I heard just today, okay, first of all, I heard the election engineering issue, okay, what everybody was all concerned about, and it was an excellent show. Actually, it was about the GRU, the Russian GRU, which I've known about for long before I started doing your show with your guests. I had been working. I've worked with them and been to Russia and met them. Specifically, they are the military intelligence experts, and they are probably the greatest on the earth. They're probably the greatest intelligence experts. Okay, going aside from the Mossad, aside from MI6, all this other nonsense. Okay, they are the top dogs. All right, and so I got a real earful and eyeful of how they managed to subjugate the 2018 election. All right, so no wonder we didn't stand a chance after seeing what I saw today. We didn't stand a chance, and all I can say is, guess what? The Russians are just warming up. They're just fine-tuning the process. Okay?
Did you mean the 2016 elections, Greg?
Well, yes, the 2016 elections.
Okay.
Okay. For Trump and Hillary Clinton. I'm sorry.
I see. Okay.
I said.
You
right,
said
okay.
2018, but 2016 election. Okay, gotcha.
2016, right? Okay. And I can say from what I learned today, okay, is it goes something like this: is that the Russians have fine-tuned the process, and they are going, they're going to, put it, not to carry the fear message out to your listener base, but they are fine-tuning the process, and next time they'll even be better. They haven't backed down. They haven't been intimidated, and they haven't even been caught, really. They haven't been caught by our counterintelligence services. All right? So the next time around, count on it. They are going to have complete control of our of next elections in, what is it, 2020?
Yes, yes.
2020. Okay. So, and then the other absolutely unbelievable thing I heard today. I still can't believe it. I truly can't believe it. All right, is that the Trump administration is attempting to figure out how they can use nuclear weapons to offset the hurricanes, these violent hurricanes.
Yes.
And also, they're also exploring the possibility of using them on earthquakes, to nullify earthquakes. I'm sorry. Is there something wrong? Is there a reason why I carry around a token quarter from the 1963 World's Fair? Actually, it's not a token quarter; it's a token dime that's been exposed to neutron radiation. Okay, to remind me of the dangers and the insanity around using nuclear energy. Okay, is there a reason why I think this, Dan? I'd like to know from your listeners if there's a reason why I think these ideas are insane, using nuclear weapons to try to counteract massive hurricanes, and try to counteract earthquakes. Okay, so I'm putting this out as a questionnaire. I'm open for suggestions. Am I not seeing something here? Because that was just today. I still haven't got my head wrapped around it. Okay?
Yes, and I think some of those fall into the category of distraction, Greg. So we don't want to be watching too much of the news. These are far-fetched ideas that are not meant to be taken seriously at all. Much like the recent purchase of Greenland. Trump mentions getting cancer from wind turbines. There's about a third of everything he says is meant for distraction, and he's trolling the media to bite on some of these topics. And so I think the best thing is to stay away from them. The best is to stay away from the distraction, and then focus on what he's really doing versus the distraction. That whole nuking a hurricane is laughable on its face. We know that's not serious.
Have you heard that, Dan?
Yes, yes.
Have any of your listeners heard that?
Yes, yes.
I heard it for the first time today. Okay, and okay. Oh my God. Okay. It's like when I heard that the founding fathers of the nuclear bomb. Okay. J. Oppenheimer, Edward Teller. One of the next things they wanted to do after they had actually triggered a fissile bomb was over Hiroshima, over Nagasaki. By the way, they just had the anniversary of that issue. But they wanted to fire a nuclear device at the moon to try to split the moon in half, and then study the gravitational effects of splitting the moon up, okay, on the Earth. I'm sorry, I know I have limited intelligence, and I have definitely limited capability on nuclear physics, but some things, to me, seem to be a very, very dangerous idea. Okay, so that was one of them, and blowing up nuclear weapons to try to counteract the massive cyclonic force of a hurricane. That seems to be really dubious myself.
Oh yeah,
so
yes.
I'm open for somebody to dress me down and tell me where my thinking is flawed. Okay, I really am open to it.
Yes,
okay.
And hopefully the listeners will leave comments and suggestions and questions for future shows too, because it is hard as someone like myself who spends half the time differentiating well, what we hear from the president, what's true versus what's all just trolling the media. It is hard to differentiate because there is so much nonsense that is out there. But I do think that's laughable with the whole hurricane thing. He also wants to send a man to the moon again, allegedly. And so there's a lot of things like that that are just I think just poking and prodding to see who reacts to some of these things of nonsense. But I don't think they're serious. But hopefully we'll get some listeners to write in and give us their thoughts on some of these outlandish things.
Well, I know when I heard Donald Trump say that he thought the whole global warming issue was a big joke, okay, a big product from, what was it, fake news, okay?
Yes.
That was ginned up by fake news. You know, I've been to all the places. I've been to Greenland, okay? I've been to Alaska. I've been to the North Pole, all right? I've been to all these places. I have been to Namtak in Antarctica. I know what was there a few years ago, and I know what was there, what was happening just a few months ago, okay? And all I can say is that this guy better wake up, all right? If he is going on about the forest fires in the Amazon being fake news, please, I think he should turn over the decision-making process to someone else, please, okay? Because we're definitely running into a real dangerous area with our global situation. So that's all I can say on that right now. Next, I'd like to get to, if you don't mind, and for your listeners, I'd like to get to this Jeffrey Epstein issue, which I have been talking endlessly about for 4.5, 5 years now, 5 years at least. Okay, and the situation of what that and who that affects, and what is the result of that situation. I'd love to speak to that issue right now, Dan.
Yeah. So what do you think about the first of all the strange death, the prison death, the suicide, and then the fallout, and now this strange random brother coming out of nowhere to be the heir to the estate or something to that effect? It's just the whole story is so bizarre. What's your take on some of these instances?
Okay. Well, I didn't think things could be much more bizarre than seeing a posed photo in an I&O burger place in Los Angeles with Ghislaine Maxwell. All right, sitting there posing for a shot. Okay. I don't know if all the listeners know who Ghislaine Maxwell is, but she is the daughter, okay, of the former publisher Robert Maxwell, and she's also a known, highly placed Mossad agent. She's worked for the Mossad forever, for a long time, and the Mossad was probably incremental in doing away with her father. Yes, that was one thing I confirmed this last week, was that, yes, there was a deal cut with Ghislaine Maxwell to do away with your old daddy, pitch him off the end of a boat, off the fantail of a boat, okay, and that was that, all right, and of course she inherited everything and became one of the top socialites on the East Coast, in New York, okay, extremely wealthy, as one might imagine, but the thing is that she somehow was cultivated. I think that was part of the deal that was cut with Mr. Epstein, Jeffrey Epstein, who, as I can personally testify, everybody seems to be mystified by this fact that Mr. Epstein no one seems to know how he made his money. I can tell you how he made his money, all right? It's real simple. When you're in the intelligence business, you have to have everything runs on money, of course. The mission or assignment, I had to convert either my U.S. money or my European money or my Middle East money back and forth. Okay, I had to change currency, convert currency, and I had to do it using a CHIM system. That was called the Combined Human Intelligence Management System. CHIMS, get it? Not chimp. Okay. Although sometimes I thought I'm convinced that I was working for chimps. Okay. Noam Chomsky on these chimps. Okay. So, but the thing is that yes, and it was Jeffrey Epstein who was working. Okay, he had a hand in the direct monetary conversion for the intelligence services, and that when you say intelligence services, that can be drug money laundering, that can include the Bank of Credit and Commerce International, aka BACI, all right, that can include the HSBC scandal, okay, who finance most of the intelligence operations. And if anybody doubts what I'm saying, just do a quick check on Mr. Robert Mueller, okay, Robert Mueller, all right, okay, Hillary Clinton, okay, and Loretta Lynch, okay, the former AG, all right, just look up the connection to HSBC, all right, and Jeffrey Epstein. So Jeffrey Epstein was basically making, out of every conversion from one monetary form to another, he made a percentage. Okay, they say some nonsense about he worked for, what was it, mutual funds, something like that, retirement funds, something like that. I think you would even know a little bit about that, Dan.
Yeah, they just say he was a financier, but there was really no history or historical account of where exactly he worked all these years. But he certainly made his money somehow.
Well, and the connection that goes with Mr. Trump goes something like this: is that Mr. Trump now has been designated and named as a recipient of a new form of Israeli currency. Okay, I don't know the name of it yet. They haven't made it. Okay, they haven't named this currency, but yes, Mr. Trump is going to be the recipient of this wonderful award given by Mr. Netanyahu to designate him the owner of a new Israeli shekel, okay, as we'll call it that for lack of a better term, an Israeli shekel. That bears watching, and because that changes a lot of the monetary input of this country into the sloshing and sluicing effect of money laundering with the country of Israel. Quite literally, that's it in a nutshell. So yes, Jeffrey Epstein was responsible for intelligence conversion of currency in operations all over the world. That's how he made. Every time some nefarious business was done somewhere, he took a cut. And this nonsense about how these newspaper agencies and CNN and so forth, they're beginning to call him now a multi-millionaire. Forget it. He was a multi-billionaire years ago. Years ago. And most people knew even less about him back then. And people have been wondering over the years. There was conjecture that's been flying about how he made his fortune. That's how he made it. All right. With all his connections with such luminaries of the intelligence business and luminaries of the sexual what's the word, extortion business?
Blackmail, yes. Extortion, yep.
Yes. Yeah, extortion. Okay, and of course you can look at people that he was associated with. Okay. Besides, and by the way, okay, for anybody out there listening, my good friend who was killed in exactly the same way that Mr. Epstein was supposedly was, okay. Actually, when they said he was the first attempt that was made, this fellow named Tartaglione, who was in this cell. Yeah, right. Please, okay. You know, the authorities put this guy who was a multiple convicted, four-time serial killer. They put him in the same cell with Jeffrey Epstein. Please stop. You know, most people are stupid. Most people, are actually unbelievably gullible when it comes to what the government says. You know, most people, 90% of the people, believe word for word what William Barr has to say about anything. Okay, the honest to God truth, they believe it. Okay, they believe what Donald Trump has to say. They believe it. Okay, 90% will believe this. Okay, understand this. You know, when it comes to money men, okay, in the judicial world, okay, you know, people that handle large amounts of money and also control sex, okay, sex, S-E-X, it's not spelled any other way, folks. Yes, and especially when it's underage sex, like what Mr. Pimp for pedophiles, pedophile pimp himself was Jeffrey Epstein. Okay, they believe anything the government says about it. Okay, that goes on with him. Okay, Jean Palfrey, the D.C. madam, told me several different things, many different ways. Okay, she and I were friends. Of course, everybody, when they hear that, they automatically assume the worst. All right, forget it. Jean Palfrey knew the business, but it finally, when she thought she could get out of it, she was trying to transfer money to Germany to get away from these people, and we'll add the 9/11 issue to it. The 9/11 issue. Yes, Jeffrey Epstein was connected to the 9/11 issue, as per witness his Saudi Arabian passport. Okay, you know, the ominous Saudi Arabian passport and the ominous Saudi Arabian prince. Okay, who manages to hack U.S. citizens to pieces, blow U.S. citizens to pieces, shoots people, U.S. citizens in country western fairs, you know, without a qualm, doesn't even think about it, and our system backs that prince, that Saudi Arabian prince up. Okay, so I was told from Jean Palfrey before her untimely demise. And if you don't know who Jean Palfrey is, she is the D.C. madam, but she was convicted after a circus type of trial. Okay, I was even dumbfounded, you know, what a circus it was coming from the government. But she was convicted, and mysteriously she was visiting her mother in Dunedin, Florida, and she died by hanging, okay, in a garden shed at her mother's residence, okay, all right. The funny thing is that her mother supposedly had laid down to take a nap, okay, it was the afternoon, and then she woke, couldn't find her daughter, all right. It appears that from my investigation, you know, I always think when my good friends are murdered, okay, and it appears that there was a knock on the door. They did have the place wired. The U.S. government agencies did have it wired, okay, and yes, she answered the door. She was hit with a stun gun, okay, with a stun gun, you know, a taser, okay, and she was taken out, carried out, and and she was actually had the noose. The noose was made for her and placed in the shed, and they had to inject Jean Palfrey. They had to inject her umbilicus with sedatives. All right, and they had to cause a muscle relaxation, because women, as a rule, especially light women, don't always hang when they attempt, death by strangulation and hanging. Okay, it's not always successful because their bodies are lighter. So that's what happened to Jean Palfrey. Was, yes, she was injected in the umbilicus, and she was killed. Okay, by a specialized team. Okay, and by the way, I got that information specifically from a former KGB hit team specialist. Okay.
And
So,
Greg, just to fill in here, that location is essentially is an injection into your belly button location. Is that correct? Where it's not doctors don't look into that.
I said umbilicus. I'm used to speaking in medical terms.
Yep, that is just for the listeners out there. And so a doctor or medical examiner looking at the body afterwards is not going to be looking there in that location and is going to rule it probably a suicide by hanging. But instead, she was staged. The body was staged after she was already dead and strung up there. Certainly a little garden shed would not be a high enough place to jump from or have the strength to hold someone jumping to kill themselves. So obviously hers was not a suicide. Okay, continue on.
Yeah. When I knew Jean, when I had dinner with her a week and a half before, out here in California, I had dinner with her, and I'll bet she didn't go any heavier than 112 pounds. Okay, so that adds a huge question mark to the whole issue. Okay, in my mind, it did initially, and of course now I'm convinced after speaking to a member of a KGB, covert KGB assassination team. Yes, that was normal. Okay, that's how it happened. That was what was done. Of course, the Dunedin, Southern Florida forensic team wouldn't catch anything like that. We're not talking the Miami-Dade forensic team which I worked for. I trained with, many years ago. I trained with that Miami-Dade forensic team. Okay, in Dade County, they knew their business. They knew exactly what they were doing. Okay, they would have detected that especially with Joe Davis and Ken Wright doing the examination. They would have picked up that in a second. Okay, but no, the little underfunded Dunedin Police Department, no, this whole thing was way beyond them. But getting back to Jeffrey Epstein, yes, people think that he was sitting in a cell all day long, playing a harmonica, nobody loves me, I didn't do anything really wrong, all those people, got together and lied about me, so that's why I'm in here. No, Mr. Epstein had a virtual musical chairs set a parade of lawyers coming in all hours of the day, all hours of the night. And here's the thing: is the contract to kill Mr. Epstein was led by the L3 Corporation. Again, Israel. Okay. Now, did I stutter at all when that came across, Dan?
No, L3. L3. I heard that clear as day.
Yeah. Okay, good. That's who had the contract, and that was on request. Yes. Now, Mr. Trump, he is a goofball at times. Okay. Most of the time, he is a goofball, but he is in the right vein in this situation. He is speaking correctly. He said that Hillary Clinton, the Clintons had Mr. Epstein killed. Yes. Given the fact that as we both know, Dan, is that Hillary Clinton and Huma Abedin had had been responsible for creating some of the most hideous, indescribable, in fact, they're so bad, the murders that they were filmed doing, Huma Abedin and Hillary Clinton, that we can't even discuss them here on your show, okay? But the New York NYPD does have complete footage of the hideous, indescribable murders that Hillary Clinton took part in, and to say it was satanic, that would be an understatement. That would be a relief to say it was satanic. Okay, yes, they were responsible for murders on St. James Island. Okay, or Little St. James Island, I believe they call it, and AKA, as my former boss told me, that the former the boat that she was on that was sailing by the island, they referred to it as Orgy Island. It's been Orgy Island for many years. All right, that is St. James Island. That is the island that Jeffrey Epstein owned. All right, and that's where he has taken, and I've been able to ascertain at least representatives from 8 different countries that have shown up there, including members, distinguished luminaries from our own company, our own country. Excuse me, company's right also. All right, but our own country that have been taken there on board the Pussy Express. That was the name given to Mr. Epstein's plane, the Pussy Express. All right, and of course, besides Mr. Trump, our president, our eminent president. Okay, yes, he was there. The Clintons were there, at least according to the registry. Okay, for the fight manifest, at least 28 times. At least 28 times.
Yeah, that was Bill Clinton, correct? 26 or 28 times.
Right, at least. Okay. Yeah. Yes, and of course Hillary Clinton and Huma Abedin, but then we have members of the royal family that have vehemently and violently been denying any connection to the whole thing, the whole issue. I don't buy it for 1 second. I've seen the film footage, okay, of them, okay, the royal family members, all right, trying to avoid the camera lens. Okay, I've seen it. All right. No, they were there. They have been there, and then other representatives from all over the world have been there. And right now, as I said 5 years ago, I said Virginia Roberts. She is the young lady. If she survives, she is the young lady who can name names, including Ghislaine Maxwell. Okay, Ghislaine Maxwell, and the roles that were all were used, and the methods that were used, to find, locate, recruit, okay, all these people, all these young people. That's the whole key to this issue, is youth, young people, all right? Little boys, little girls, all right? 13, 14 was just about the operational age. Anything older than that, I know Jeffrey Epstein dug his heels in and got angry when somebody produced an 18-year-old child for him, okay, to molest. All right, so that in a nutshell is what was going on for sure. Now, the agency people who were responsible for creating this whole debacle, okay, of public service, okay, and what public service can be mangled and twisted into. Well, let's see. The first person I know of was, let me see, what was his name? Nick Negroponte. Nick Negroponte, who created virtually all the high-speed database systems for intelligence operations, but he's such a clever guy, and he wasn't limited by any kind of verisimilitude when it came to his imagination. All right, he developed the system, high-speed video systems for going to orphanages. And, we're talking orphanages usually run by nuns from the Catholic Church, and that's how I heard about it. That's how I heard about it, was the nuns from the Catholic Church in various countries like Cambodia, like Thailand, like Central America, you name it, and all the children there could be examined and their biographics studied and recorded there on these high-speed video cameras. And then the database for it was established, okay, with the assistance and help from Nick Negroponte, an all-star coming out of the academic system of MIT. And then, of course, I worked in Central America with this guy, and that's his older brother, John Negroponte. And I believe we have some footage of Mr. Negroponte looking benevolent. Okay, John Negroponte, don't we?
Yeah. Now, that's his older brother, Nicholas's older brother, the former United States Deputy Secretary of State?
Yes.
John? Okay, I've got an image up here on the screen right now of him, clean-cut looking guy in front of a patriotic look in front of a flag.
Of course.
Of course.
When did you know it?
Shocked.
Yeah. Nick is the younger one. John is the older one. And his name, when I was in Central America working, okay, his name, Mr. Negroponte, when he was organizing and directing death squads in Honduras, now I want to say that name again for Hillary Clinton, okay? Honduras, all right? John Negroponte in Honduras, as in death squads and coups, okay? In-house coups that were replacing, as of recently, replacing the leaders, democratically elected leaders, all right? I hope Hillary Clinton gets a hold of this show, because she will have a heart attack, guaranteed, and not before time either. But Mr. Negroponte, of course, was known as Death Squad John, and he used his brother's whole intelligence developing systems for identifying insurgencies and members of the insurgency to point his death squads to. Death Squad John, okay, John Negroponte. He comes across as Mr. Politically astute, Mr. Wonderful guy, okay, extremely dangerous. There's nothing pleasant about any of these people, okay. They were all working with Mr. Epstein. They were all working with the Israelis. And don't think for 1 second that the Israelis weren't in Central America. All right? Let's see. Who can? Let me see. If I remember correctly, I'll think of it in a second. A couple of names, okay, that come to mind in connection with Jeffrey Epstein. Okay, let me see. I'm thinking. Okay. Okay. Give me a second. I'll think of some more names. Israeli names. Virtually all the entire drugs. Okay. All the entire shipment of drugs that were being used coming up from Colombia through Central America, that was all expedited with the aid and assistance of the Israelis. Okay. So, and again, as I pointed out, and I said that Mr. Epstein was directly responsible, okay, for transferring funds to these drug enforcement, not the drug enforcement agencies, but the actual drug operations. Now, at this time, I need to point something out. Okay, as a result, right now, there's 150 as of today, as of every day for the last several years, there's been 150 deaths attributed to the opioids. Okay, opiates, and opioids. Okay, all being put together by who is now being sued finally the U.S. government's doing something, but Johnson & Johnson, the Johnson & Johnson company, and also the Sackler, Purdue Pharmaceuticals, that is all directly connected to all of this. Okay, this whole situation with Jeffrey Epstein. Okay, all of this. All right. Let me see. I'm still thinking about that name. You know, I'll have to let you talk for a second.
Is it Michael Harari?
Yes, Mike Harari.
Oh, no, really?
Yeah, Mike Harari. He wasn't Michael Harari. I'm sorry. I was drawing a blank. Mike Harari. Yes, Mike Harari, the famous Mike Harari.
Yeah, he goes way back. Now, he died recently, but he's a long-time Israeli Mossad operative with the CIA here, working jointly with the U.S. intelligence.
I'm sorry. Even though I knew who he was in Central America with me, actually in Panama, okay, at the time. All right, and I was drawing a blank. That's the problem when you spend so much time around dirtbags. You get to know so many dirtbags, and you have to remember all the dirtbags, even by their legitimate names and their street handles. Okay, so yes, Mike Harari. Okay, yes, he's directly responsible for a lot of this issue, and he worked with the Negropontes in Honduras. By the way, I had a nice talk with a couple fellows not too long ago concerning Tegucigalpa. Okay, the issue of Tegucigalpa in Honduras and what was going on there. And I fortunately survived an attack on a bus. The bus was shot to pieces. I just happened to be going over to the Caribbean side, and the bus came under fire, and the bus was ambushed. Okay, so Celly Castillo. Does that name ring a bell?
Yes.
Okay,
Salerno Celly Castillo. Yep, DEA.
Yes, right. Thank you. I had a nice conversation concerning that attack, and I didn't know who until he told me. I wasn't aware of who had done the ambush. Okay, that wasn't the top of my priorities when I was digging a hole to the bottom of the bus with my belly button. Okay, but yeah, Celly Castillo was the one who actually has blown the whistle many times on this group, specifically the Epstein, Negroponte, CIA connected, Freeway Ricky Ross group. Okay, that name rings a bell.
Yes.
Freeway Ricky Ross, and of course when you say Freeway Ricky Ross and the massive drug cartels, okay, that includes the Bush family, the Bush crime family, George H.W. Bush. All right, so I welcome any of your listeners to look up those names, okay, and see how they're connected to George H.W. Bush, the Clintons, yes, the Clintons, and also George, the Bush family. All right, so I welcome anybody to look those names up, and of course when you say Bush family, that means the agency. All right, so that's what I have. Yes, the recent Clinton requested the L3 to kill Mr. Epstein in the, and if you notice, most of the employees have stopped talking. Okay, in the Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York City. All right. What I have to say about that is quite simply this. Years ago, I designed the violence management plan, and by the way, I just heard several clicks on this show, okay, on the phone system. All right, but I designed the violence management plan for the state of California, okay, using my intelligence background, and that was one of the concerns I had, was keeping vitally important VIPs, very important people alive, to testify. And some of the suggestions that I made to the Department of Corrections in California, yes, were implemented, and to this date, I can say this comfortably, is that the FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigation, actually prefers to put their people that they consider very important witnesses, that just simply, they cannot be killed, okay? Under any circumstances, they cannot be killed, okay? So they put them into a prison, into a specifically Folsom State Prison, the new prison, Folsom State Prison, and the suicide watches are implemented. And the suicide watch is basically in a suicide-proof cell, okay, where there are no such things as bars. There's no such thing as grates over the air vents in the room, okay, and the door is never closed. The solid door is never closed. It's kept open. There is a person sitting there, especially if they've attempted suicide, within the last few hours, like Mr. Epstein had, supposedly he had, okay, or only Mr. Tartaglione knows, okay. Everybody should look up his history, by the way, in this issue. And secondly, is that they were suicide-proof cells. Well, one person is sitting there all the time. The door is not closed, so he can get to the person attempting suicide, usually within 1 or 2 steps. Okay, that's almost a required issue. Okay, a required operation, a procedure, and also when you have somebody where there's a massive amount of national defense and justice, issues of justice going on, like there was with Mr. Epstein. Okay, you usually have somebody watching him, watching the person watching him. Okay, so at least 3 people. Okay, I said 2. The third person is always a lieutenant, somebody with administrative command decision capability that is watching those 2, the first 2, okay, that are watching him. All right, and then you have all kinds of video recording imagery, okay, motion detector, infrared, the whole bit, okay, watching. They're always watching, okay. So that's what Mr. Epstein was doing, and the reason why he was killed, and yes, he was killed, was because he was being taken out of his cell to another area of the correctional center, okay, where he could get all kinds of goodies, and he can talk with his homeboys and his pimp lawyers and the whole bit, okay. He could talk to them, and which is what he was doing. And the thing is that the L3 contractor who was responsible for garroting Mr. Epstein, okay, I have a physical description. He was at least 6'2" to 6'4", okay, at least, okay, and he used something smooth, okay, smooth and flat, okay, and the reason why there were 3 fractures of the hyoid bone in Mr. Epstein's throat was because the muscle building, okay, that's the best way to describe the build of this guy. Anthropomorphically speaking, he was a muscle builder, okay, and he walked behind Mr. Epstein. Mr. Epstein was under the impression that this guy was a lawyer or working with a lawyer, and as they were walking down the passageway back to the cell, this contractor dropped the smooth surface garrote, probably with either a belt, a very nice reinforced belt, okay, something that wouldn't leave any indentations in the skin, okay, and he turned around as the assassin dropped the belt around his throat. Mr. Epstein knew immediately what was happening, but the assassin turned around, bent forward with the garrote in his hand, his right hand, okay, and he bent forward and leaned forward, okay. That immediately, it was instantaneous, and immediately, first of all, the hyoid bone crushing and fracturing was just an afterthought, okay, but the pressure that was placed on the carotid arteries and the baroreceptors in his neck, the response was instantaneous. He probably knew it was happening, but he certainly couldn't react fast enough to stop it, okay? And so virtually he was probably killed within 3 seconds, 3 to 5 seconds. There was no struggling, there was no issues of, did he have any second thoughts or anything like that, okay? That's how he was garroted. That's who did it. That's what happened, okay? And of course, then the body was taken back to the cell. He was probably just carried back to the cell. And of course, the whole issue, and I've noticed that as I said, there were normally two officers. Well, there were two officers there. And supposedly, they were either sent somewhere else, told to shut up, which it probably sounds like they were, or they were put to sleep with some sort of sleeping implement, gas, whatever. Okay, that's all risky. I tend not to believe that's what it was, but I believe that the whole issue was exactly that. It happened in the very dark hours of the morning, between 2:30 and 3, usually when people are sleeping most heavily, and they are the least on guard.
So Greg, with your background in the prisons, for instance, is it even likely for anyone to even commit suicide, even with a bed sheet or anything to that effect? They said with Epstein, it could have been he was in a kneeling position and he could have hung himself that way. What is the likelihood of ever even happening?
Given the fact that he's already made an attempt, or somebody made an attempt on him, there's a big question mark about this fellow Tartaglione, and I can't imagine, despite all the issues that the attorney Bill Barr has to say about it, okay, there's no way he would, first of all, put somebody as adept at killing like Mr. Tartaglione was, okay, he'd killed 4 people, 4 drug dealers in a nightclub that owed his brother money. Okay, who owned the bar nightclub. Okay, so the situation is that no way, no how, and funny thing was, the first thing they did was they fired William Barr, fired the head of corrections, okay, the Department of Corrections, and he fired him, almost instantaneously, basically away from any kind of conference calls, any kind of talk, any kind of statements, testimony, or anything.
And that was the warden, right? The warden?
well, when they say ward, there's a, I understand it was the director of corrections.
Okay. And
director, you have the director of corrections, deputy director of corrections, and then you have each facility usually has you would, your would know it as deputy ward, chief deputy. Okay, it goes on like that. Okay, and as I understand it, was the director of Department of Corrections for the state of New York.
and so the other, you mentioned earlier, the other alleged suicide attempt wasn't that. He was beat up and left unconscious, or potentially a murder attempt previously. That was 3 weeks ago.
Right.
Previous to that, and they did testify with that warden and another psychologist there did testify that he was not suicidal. So that was not a suicide attempt. So that's why Epstein was removed from suicide watch. And so he was just,
right.
He wasn't in the suicide watch there when that took place. That was another thing that came out in the news and the media that was
Right.
that was incorrect. He wasn't in suicide watch.
No organization, period, and that I know of in the United States, given the need and for the to keep this man alive under all the pressure of all the litigants, all your litigants, all your listeners on your show, okay, I guarantee it, including you and I, Dan, we will never, ever, we will be dead from old age by the time this case comes to, was it settling, okay, with the brother, just the estate, okay, of Mr. Epstein.
Sure.
We will be long gone. We will be dust by that time. Okay, we will never see the end of the settlement of this estate in our lifetime. Okay.
Yeah. So
that's how critical.
Yeah, correct.
That's how critical this was.
And in the
alive.
in the last, we got to about 2 minutes left in the show, Greg. What is the likelihood of those cameras failing in his room or the jail location, and the guards not doing their 30-minute checks, forging those log files? The likelihood of all these things coming together in a perfect storm leads anyone with a common sense, a brain, to know that this was a hit or a murder. It certainly was not a suicide. What are your thoughts on all these other circumstances?
Institutionalized hit. Okay, that's the best way to say it. And virtually none of this could have happened. The guards falling asleep, or they could have been, virtually put asleep. I heard that too. It's all crap. It's all bullshit. Okay, because when all else fails, hey, those 3 separate cameras that were recording everything that went on in the cell. Okay, 3 separate cameras, and then to have, those classic. Oh, well, there was something wrong with the film. There was something wrong. There was a misfire with the camera. It didn't work. Something happened. I heard about an inmate the other evening, being burned to death in his cell. Okay, when he was the only one in the cell. Okay, he was burned to death, and they had it on. They had the whole thing recorded, but then again, for some reason, the footage wasn't available. Okay, something happened to the footage. It doesn't happen like that.
It reminds us of the attack on the Pentagon on 9/11, where those 86 surveillance cameras all failed to get the footage of what happened at the Pentagon that day for some odd, strange reasons. And so we know with the business that we're in here, there's no such thing as a coincidence, of course. And so this is it's all rubbish. What we're hearing on the mainstream news is him dying by strangulation, dying by hanging with broken bones in his neck from the pressure of his killing himself, is complete rubbish. There was broken, basically due to the strangulation in the front of his neck, which is common with strangulation. Is that correct?
That is common. Okay. Yes, with hanging, we have to, make sure we.
Sorry, not hanging, but strangulation. The difference, there's different bones that are broken in a strangulation versus a hanging, correct?
Right. And the issue of the angle of attack, the way the pressure that was brought to bear, okay, all of these things have to be considered. And given the fact that supposedly, there were marks on his neck from a few days before, I'm sorry, no one in their right mind, okay, in the Department of Corrections, a PhD level psychologist, okay, who said that he was non-suicidal, with all of that issue going on, with who he was, and all the people that he was connected to, would ever release him from a suicide watch. Okay, he would always be within 2 steps from an employee.
Yeah, that was, and like you said, I failed to mention that earlier. He was, at the time, Epstein was the highest profile prisoner in the entire United States at the time, right?
That's correct.
So there's no way any of these things would even happen for a high profile inmate such as Epstein. And then, of course, we get this perfect storm of him attempting suicide once, a few weeks later, then successfully pulling it off, and the cameras aren't working and all of this other nonsense. So for the listeners out there, we want to let them know that this certainly was no suicide. It wasn't done at the hands of himself. There was no way that it would even happen, and he was not suicidal. But this was a hit, an institutionalized hit that took place.
Right, and he was killed in another part of the facility.
Ah.
That's simple.
Okay.
He was locked out. He had been keeping, all-night vigil with his whole team, working on this miracle defense.
Yeah.
All right. So yes, that was the only time that he would be vulnerable. Okay, and not be on film. Okay, would be passageway.
Yeah.
Going conference room, meeting with his team, back to his cell, his thoroughly monitored cell, with at least his 3 keepers. Okay, his suicide specialist. And like I say, I've stood many a vigil on suicide prevention for Department of Corrections, and I am the fellow who designed the violence plan for corrections. Okay, so I do know what I'm talking about. I do know what I speak of, and that's exactly what I would have said if we'd been to do your show. Okay, the first suicide attempt, and the second successful murder. Okay, that's exactly what I would have told your listeners.
Exactly.
No, I'm not surprised. The next thing that boggles my mind, does anybody know where Ghislaine Maxwell is?
Correct. I don't believe she's been spotted or found. She might be on the East Coast. From what we heard about that In-N-Out burger, that was a hoax or a fake. That was an image of her at that location in California, but who knows? Speculation going around, but she's the one they really need to get after to get to the bottom of this. She was the leader.
And there should have been an all points bulletin, weeks ago.
Yeah.
Years ago, there should have been all points bulletin for her. She was every bit as viable, dangerous, and involved and culpable as Epstein.
Yes.
Okay? It's just that simple. Why is she wondering? And are you going to tell me the NSA doesn't know where she is? The NSA that knows every single person on Earth is, that has an electronic device, right? Please. Okay. I don't care. Yes, she has the goods on all kinds of politicians. which makes it even more imperative that we get our hands on her. The justice system gets our hands on her, all right? Absolutely, or else she's going to be mysteriously dealt with, okay, like Mr. Epstein. Okay, that's another one of those issues. And I really would like to see some of the blood gas work that was done on Mr. Epstein, the post-mortem, okay. I'd like to see the enzyme work that was done on Mr. Epstein, me myself, okay. These are the things that I would have had checked and done, okay. I know from working in Miami-Dade County, Dade County coroner, I know what's done, okay. The DNA checks, okay. We have his brother now, okay. We could check the DNA results on cross-matching type of tissue, okay. That was done. So there's probably at least 150 different tests that should have been done on Mr. Epstein, if indeed it was Mr. Epstein that they've had. As far as I know, I haven't heard a word about any kind of funeral. I haven't heard a word about any kind of confirmation. I haven't seen any kind of photographs, okay? Now, if someone else out there has seen something, please have them write to your show, okay? And tell me that I'm full of crap on all of this stuff. You know, I would nothing.
Yeah, one of the things, good point there, Greg. We haven't had a memorial service, an obituary, a funeral, or anything. And the images that came out, I think, from the New York Post the next day of that man on a gurney that came out, the nose and the ears don't even resemble Jeffrey Epstein, and those photos are undated file photos, I believe, that were not dated, and I don't believe it was even Epstein himself. So we were being fed a spoonful of BS from the very beginning once he first died, because those photos were not even him. And so there's a lot of speculation going on here, but it's very strange to say the least with all of this.
Right. You know, I want to see the DNA markers, the enzyme markers, okay, and blood gas markers, okay, all of these things. You know, everything from the O2, the CO2 markers. These issues all entered in, and which affected me directly on my issue of the Iceman in Iraq.
Oh, sure.
Okay, the famous Iceman case. Okay, where my team, okay, my wonderful, devoted and supportive team that I was in Iraq with, those sons of bitches, every last one of them. Okay, well they beat that poor man to death who was a taxi driver. They beat him to death, and when they beat him to death, this is my commanding officer, Timothy Drew Ryan, and Thomas Pappas, by the way. Thomas Pappas, they had that man hanging by his arms. They had him beaten to death in the showers. He died of a heart attack. Gee, imagine that, from being beaten to death. They took his body, and this was on the recommendation of Timothy Drew Ryan, okay? I invite everybody to look these names up, because you're going to see these names in my book that's being printed up right now, all right? But you can see all this information that I'm speaking of is because Timothy Drew Ryan, to cover up this hideous interrogation / murder, he ordered, he told Thomas Pappas, who was his commanding officer, Colonel Pappas and Lieutenant Colonel Ryan, by the way, we're talking about here, he ordered that the body be placed in a body bag, regulation body bag full of ice to slow the blood gases down, and then take the body out and dump it on the outskirts of, at that time, it was of Balad, all right? So, Balad, Iraq. So, yes, and I know for a fact that the postmortem would have been, if I'd been there, I could have double-checked it. Remember, I was halfway through medical school, and I already had four separate medical specialties before I even went to Iraq. All right, so I know what I was doing. Okay, and remember, you have my experience when I was in Miami-Dade. Okay, working for the forensic pathologist's office at that time. Okay, everyone can see it. See that office now? You can see it on Dr. D, medical examiner. Okay, 30 years later, I was working as an assistant to that office. So you can see that there. Your listeners can see that there if they want.
Okay, and so that was that the documentary Taxi Driver, Taxi to the Dark Side about the Iceman?
Boy, you're a sharp man, Dan. You're a sharp man. Nothing gets by you. Yes.
And that is
the dark side.
That is about the taxi driver, about the Iceman, and sure enough, this case took place.
No, they're actually two separate cases.
Oh, they are.
The Iceman is a separate case. The taxi to the dark side. That was that poor kid who had saved up his money, bought a taxi. He was stopped at a U.S. checkpoint, and he was turned over. And it was rather fateful. He was turned over to my old intelligence group there. Okay.
Oh, that's what it was. Okay.
In Afghanistan. Okay. He was turned over to my old intelligence group. I believe that intelligence group was the 350th Military Intelligence Group.
Okay.
Okay. And that poor guy was hung by his wrists. Okay, manacles, and he was beaten for 3 days with baseball bats until his body was turned to hamburger. All right. On the post-mortem that was done, that I've been describing, they actually described that man's body as resembling 150 pounds of hamburger. That's how badly his body was beaten.
And that documentary is Taxi to the Dark Side. It's tough to get, and they're pulling that down because it really sheds the U.S. military in a bad light. But the problem is, it's a factual documentary, just like the Iceman was. Now, he also happened to be a taxi driver, but the Iceman is the one you're talking about, where they also killed him while he was in as a detainee there in your particular case.
He was picked up, and they questioned him in the showers. Okay, they're at Balad. Okay, in the shower. I'm sorry, it was Abu Ghraib.
Okay.
And they questioned him in the showers. He was beaten in the showers there. And by the way, small world we live in. And okay, the man who did the investigation, Josh, he did the investigation of the taxi to the dark side. He actually went undercover. Okay, and he did all the investigation. That poor man was interrogated and beaten to death by my old group, the 350th. Okay, and he actually interviewed the family. He interviewed his parents. Okay, he interviewed everybody in Afghanistan there.
Yeah, that's nasty stuff.
Two separate incidents, two separate countries. Okay, Iceman was in Iraq. Taxi was in a bog room.
Okay, now your book is that October 8th?
Yes.
And that goes through this. That your book goes through that. And it talks about what you had mentioned, the Colonel, Lieutenant Colonel Pappas, Victor Artiga, the whole case that went to the Supreme Court.
Lieutenant Colonel at the time was Lieutenant Colonel Timothy. And it's funny, all of the people that we're talking about, they've all were prominently promoted and given all kinds of goodies, okay, and including Thomas Pappas, the infamous Thomas Pappas. Okay, I encourage everybody to go look up on the internet. Okay, Thomas Pappas, P-P-A-S, all right. Yes, and he was the one considered entirely responsible for all the atrocities at Abu Ghraib, and what did they do? They gave him a plum position. Okay, he's been promoted 4 times. my old boss, Janice Carp, told me this not too long ago, a few weeks ago, that idiot's been promoted, and he's been promoted to the president school at Langley, Virginia. Okay, anybody that's been aware, been born within the last 30 years, okay, knows what Langley, Virginia is and what that means. So, yes, and Paris is still there as we speak right now.
Yep, it's the deep state, it's the corruption, the high levels of corruption that are going on to this day. I want to thank you for your time, Greg Ford, for tonight's show. This is very good. Current events updates with Epstein, Mr. Dershowitz, Maxwell, Barr, current events. For Greg Ford,
yeah,
my name is Negroponte Brothers. Yes, you can't forget them. Today is August 27th, 2019. For Greg Ford, this is Dan Hennon saying thank you for listening. Thank you.